Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei possessed by a biblical spirit of treachery? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Vergil Creiger for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. Ria's grimoire was as close to perfect as a person could get. Even she had to admit it. For starters, she was beautiful. Her features were soft yet refined, with high cheekbones and an aristocratic nose. Long, luxuriant lashes caressed a face that forever smiled, somehow looking aloof and well-bred yet warm and kind at the same time. Flawless white skin, pink rosebud lips and sparkling blue eyes betrayed that she was foreign to Japan, if her fantastic figure were not clue enough. Her body was soft and curvaceous, with long legs, large S, a slim waist and round hips. Her most striking feature, however, was her hair, a glorious river of burning crimson that she let hang to her waist. Ria's was gorgeous, she was extremely intelligent and very, very rich. If you were to ask her, or anyone close to her, to think of something they disliked about her, they would be hard-pressed to come up with anything concrete. She was the elite of the elite, the best society had to offer, and a real-life princess. So it really wasn't an exaggeration to say that she was, almost literally, worlds apart from the man she eventually married. The first time she ever laid eyes on him, she didn't even realize she was looking at a human being. It was the weekend, and Ria's had gone shopping for one reason or another. At some point between entering the shop and leaving it, someone had dumped what could most accurately be called a heap of crap in the middle of the pavement. It could have been dirty rags, rotten food, or perhaps simply an enormous tangled knot of greasy human hair. It was hard to say. Whatever it was, it smelled disgusting and was leaking a foul, brown, viscous fluid onto the pavement. It was dark green in color, partly due to decomposition and partly due to some sort of odd fungi that was growing on it in various places. This was not to say the heap had mushrooms sprouting out of it, but rather a particularly furry kind of moss, the sort you get on bread or cake if you leave it in a warm place for too long. Ria's did what any sane person would have done. She turned her nose up and went home. If she had stayed a bit longer, she would have seen 4 crows land around the decaying lump and peck curiously at its edges. If she had stayed longer still, she would have seen a limb of some sort, probably an arm, reach out from the unidentified mass and wave the pests away before being tucked comfortably back into its side. Over the next week, Ria's did the things an 18-year-old girl is expected to do. She went to school, chatted with her minions and bought outrageously priced Japanese merchandise over the internet. The following weekend she went shopping again, this time with her friend Akeno Himejima. Akeno was as beautiful as she was, though her beauty was more robust, oolized and mature, something Ria's was secretly jealous of. Her long black hair was tied into a ponytail, and her eyes were a vibrant purple. The two of them were walking down the street when Ria spotted the same pile of garbage, which had moved to slump against a wall next to a family restaurant. Though it had rained a few days previous, the heap was no longer dripping dubious liquids onto the ground and had dried sufficiently that it didn't smell nearly so bad as it did before. Urgh, frowned Ria's, wrinkling her nose at the unpleasant mess. I wish someone would clean it up. Disgusting, nodded Akeno. What is it anyway? I'm not sure, but I think it might be. The person, grunted a dry, sarcastic voice. Who thinks it is very rude to talk about someone as if they're not there? Both girls jumped, startled. You can talk, blurted Ria's. Yes. The heap unfolded itself upwards, far higher than its apparent mass should allow. The man, for that was what he was taller than her, the crown of her head only just reaching to his collarbone. He was wearing a large baggy coat that may or may not have been made from animal skin. Underneath it he was wearing several shirts and several pairs of trousers, which were made of a material that looked suspiciously like sackcloth. His shoes were mismatched and falling apart at the seams, and his hair was a tangled dark mess, forced down by a battered fedora hat. The lower part of his face was covered by what remained of a scarf, while the upper half was smeared with such grease and dirt, Ria's couldn't even distinguish his age. His eyes, however, captured her. They were blue, like her own, but they burned with such intensity it was as if someone had set the sky ablaze, then taken 2 embers and set them into his face. He seemed at once so young, yet so old, she could neither look nor look away. Ahem, she started at his dry cough, and her face burned as she realized she had been staring with her jaw hanging open. As flattering as I find your fascination with my face, I'm afraid I'm going to have to advise you to blink sometime in the near future. Akeno sat back and watched the exchange, becoming more amused by the minute. Ria's, the eternally compassed Ria's, was acting like a child being chastised by her father. I'm very sorry, she babbled, smoothing out her skirt with one hand and pulling at her hair with the other. I didn't. Your hair, he interrupted. It is a very unusual color. You were here last week, yes? Yes, I was. He just stood there and stared at her for a solid 5 seconds before speaking. Ria's Gremory, 18 years old, third-year student at Ku Academy. Though worshipped by the rest of the student body, you prefer to interact only with the Occult Research Club, which consists of yourself, your best friend, the school mascot and the school playboy. Ria's jaw worked uselessly for a moment. How did you know that? You have a lot of fangirls who enjoy talking about you in great detail and at great length in shrill and giddy voices. As he finished talking, the man held his right arm out straight to the side, smoothly clotheslining a sprinting, scruffy individual carrying a purse that probably didn't belong to him. "Thank you," gasped a woman Ria's had never met before, darting forward to snatch her purse. The random woman began babbling thanks as Riaz stood there, unsure as to what was going on. The hobo was ignored completely and occupied himself by dragging the groaning purse snatcher to the wall and propping him up in an oddly considerate manner. Eventually the woman left, but not before depositing a handful of notes in Ria's hand. For a long moment she simply stood there, wondering at the surreal situation she had suddenly found herself in. Feeling like a total moron, she offered the money to the grimy hobo. Do you want?" As if to answer, the man removed a wad of cash from his pocket, approximately triple the size of the one she held in her hand. "Do you really think the nice people of this restaurant would serve someone like me?" With a look of grim determination, Riaz stormed in through the front door, reward money clasped firmly in hand. When she emerged she was holding a burger, apparently not having had enough for a full meal. Once more, she held out an offering. The burning look in his eyes seemed to soften somewhat and he accepted the food in his left hand while extending his right for her to shake. "My name is Issei Haidu. Pleased to meet you." And just like that. "My name's Rai, but you already knew ya," she mumbled lamely, wishing she had a fringe to hide behind. His hand completely surrounded hers and was very warm. He was wearing a tattered pair of fingerless gloves and the feeling of his calloused fingertips on the back of her hand made her shiver. The kendo tapped her on the shoulder as Issei settled himself onto a bench. "I'll just leave you kids alone," she whispered loudly, giving her a cheesy thumbs up. Ignoring Ria's sputtering protest, Keno turned tail and ran, probably to watch from a more discreet location. "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" Yes," stammered Riaz, sitting nervously at the end of the bench. "Why is it that when you talk, even though all I hear is Japanese, your lips seem to be saying something else?" Her jaw dropped. What? "If you're not allowed to tell me, I totally understand," he grunted, taking another bite of his burger. I'm not allowed to tell you." "Meh. Fair enough." There was a short pause as Riaz stared with wide blue eyes and Issei just kept on eating. "Why are you even a hobo? You know, that's not a very polite way to." "Sorry," said Riaz, suddenly flustered again. "It's just that I've been in the human world for years and no one has ever been sharp enough to notice the language thing before." "Human world?" He smiled. She couldn't see his mouth, but still, she could tell he was smiling. "And also," she forged on, "being homeless usually comes with being malnourished, battered by the elements, etc. But that guy ran into you and you didn't even budge. Like he ran into a tree." Seriously, she began to wind down, realizing she now had his full attention. "Why? Why not?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'm an undercover celebrity and this entire conversation is being recorded on camera. Maybe I'm spy from an enemy country. Or perhaps I'm a mass murderer on the run from the police." "Mass murderer?" frowned Riaz. "You're not actually." "Technically no," he admitted. "But then again, I've killed my fair share of people and have my fair share of bounties." Riaz raised her eyebrows, surprised he would confess to as much. "Really? Well, I've bloodied my hands a bit too." "Anyone from your own species?" "No." "Then it doesn't count." "It doesn't?" "No." "Oh. Are you afraid you failed to impress me?" "Well, what?" Riaz babbled in surprise. Don't be absurd. I wouldn't dream of." Once more, the fires in his eyes softened. "You're adorable." Riaz turned as red as her hair and Issei laughed like the sun, warm and filled with life. For the most significant hour and a half of their lives the pair sat and chatted on topics that, while riveting at the time, would later evade recollection. Eventually, however, it was time to say their goodbyes. "Well," said Issei. "Thanks for the burger, I suppose." "Yeah," murmured Riaz, looking at the ground bashfully. "Thanks for. You're welcome." For the umpteenth time that day, her face blazed. What in Satan's name was wrong with her? She was a Duke of Hell, damn it. "See you," she squeaked and, head down in an hideous agony of embarrassment, took off at a full sprint. Issei watched her go. "Ice." The voice drifted on the wind, deep, sardonic and otherworldly. No one else heard it but him, for it was his burden alone to bear. "Huh?" he grunted, giving no further reaction. "I want Issei rolled his eyes. He knew what came next. To get laid. That girl back there was a total hot eye. You should tap that." "Not going to happen, Judas." Issei started walking, not bothering to lower his voice. After all, what was so weird about a hobo talking to himself? Why the hell not? Dad ass. Dem bubes. And her friend. 2 words ice threesome. You know, once upon a time I enjoyed women as well. Then I was exposed to you. You mean I'm your type? Don't get me wrong, I'm flattered, but I only do girls. You should too. They have boobs. Indeed they do. However, for some reason it's incredibly hard to get into the mood with you constantly breathing down my neck. And whose fault is that? Yours? No one asked to become my invisi stalker, you started that on your own. Now. I'm not so bad, right? How many times have I tried to have you exercised? 663. Thrice more and I'll be so many kinds of win I'll have to tattoo the word across my forehead. Why bother, no one would see it but me. Way to rain on my parade, dude. I try. With an ungentlemanly scratch, Issei trundled to a halt. He had arrived at a certain skyscraper, all glass and metal. Various thugs with dark suits and guns guarded the entrance. Issei tilted his head back and squinted his eyes, trying to see the top. We're here. Did you say you knew this guy? Yeah, he was a rival back when was I still mixed up with the triads. Calls himself boss. Never actually fought the dude though. We got a plan. Get the girl. Kill the bad guy. Save the world. Good plan. Though it worries me, your informant said this guy was a master martial artist. As an actual master martial artist. He could be tough. Master he may be, murmured Issei, stepping slowly towards his target. But then again as the first few gatekeepers noticed his presence, Issei burst forward in a flurry of movement. So am I. Issei flung open the front doors, the guard screaming on the ground behind him. He strode confidently up to the front desk, rifled around inside his coat for a few minutes to retrieve a battered photograph, then proffered it to the horrified receptionist. You seen this girl? The whole room was dyed red as the alarm went off, dozens of heavily armed men in black combat gear pouring into the room as huge blast doors sealed all the exits. Get down on the ground and put your hands on your head. The leader shouted. I'd do as he says if I were you, said Issei to the receptionist, but a blast door had gone down in front of her and she couldn't hear him. Open fire. A solid 10 seconds of gunfire later and they had run out of ammo. Hundreds of tiny dents speckled the metal wall behind him, but Issei himself was untouched. Is that all? He murmured. My turn then. It was over in moments. As with the gate guards, Issei had broken both index fingers on each guard's hands, but otherwise left them unharmed. It didn't stop them from being babies about it though, despite the fact that he had left each of them 8 spares. Issei raised his arms, examining the dozens of tiny bullet holes going through his dangling sleeves. That was close. Their rifles were quite strong, I almost couldn't dodge. Those were SG 552s if I'm not mistaken. What, no AK-47s? Dude, those went out of fashion years ago. Issei walked up to the blast door between him and the receptionist, grabbed a hold of it as if it were tinfoil and ripped it off the wall. Astonishingly, she had remained in her seat. So? He pressed. The girl. Most of the building's floors could not be accessed normally, save for the first 4 floors. The 5th floor onward had to be accessed by a small building on the opposite side of the street, whose innards consisted of one huge, heavily guarded staircase. The top floor extended across the street in a broad bridge to the 5th floor, which had elevators leading to every upper floor. Since Boss wasn't actually pedophilic, just inherently mean, Issei determined he had enough time to take the long way around. It probably would have been faster to just bust through ceiling, but he'd probably hurt his hands. And that wouldn't end well for anybody, except possibly Judas. This turned out to be an extremely poor decision, as he was attacked by a chopper on the bridge. Before the pilot's finger could finish squeezing on the trigger, Issei stomped his foot sharply onto the ground. A large portion of concrete and masonry was flipped upwards, allowing him to crouch and be shielded behind it. The hail of machine gun fire was still ongoing as the ground beneath the makeshift barrier fell away, taking Issei's decimated shield with it. The hobo was nowhere in sight. Where the hell did he go? The pilot managed to mutter before something crashed into the side of the copter and almost sent it careening into a wall. He's hanging on to one of the missiles. Shouted his co-pilot, having glanced out the left window to see what was going on. Fire it. Issei's arms were nearly torn from their sockets as the rocket let loose, dragging him along for the ride. Crash. Hissed Judas vindictively. Crash. Issei gritted his teeth and heaved himself forward, trying to force himself into a standing position. As he pulled on the nose of the rocket his center of gravity shifted and the missile's direction was changed just before it exploded against the building's side. Now inches from the endless windows and heading straight upwards, Issei forced his toes through the soles of his shoes and used them to grip the rocket's body. Just as he passed roof level, he threw his weight back and let go with his hands. Man and missile spun through the air, gravity disappearing for a long, dizzying moment. When his world righted itself, Issei was soaring towards the chopper's right, maneuvered there by his uncontrolled, swerving movement. Utilizing the surfing lessons forced into his brain by his grandfather, Issei steered his ride on a direct collision course to his aggressors. At the last possible moment he backflipped gracefully into the air, the blaze as rocket met helicopter like a warm breeze. He landed in a crouch, then walked unflinchingly towards the skyscraper as the flaming helicopter crashed into the attached building behind him. That, admitted Judas, was pretty hardcore. And it was. Meeting no resistance, Issei walked into the 5th floor lobby and pressed the button next to the elevator. After a few minutes, the doors opened and he stepped inside, invisible possessing spirit in tow. Issei selected the highest floor and settled down to wait. Judas began to hum in time to the background music. "Is it just me?" said Judas. "Or is the elevator going a little too fast?" Issei leaned his head back until he was staring straight up at the ceiling. They continued to accelerate and the music fizzled and went out. The sensation was probably similar to what one would feel should the gravity rapidly increase around their body. With muscles creaking and blood vessels popping, Issei forced himself into action and grabbed the sliding doors, pulling them roughly off the wall. His work was sloppy and a small portion of the ceiling came off along with it. Far above, but rapidly approaching, a rectangle of light showed an open door. Time slowed. A desperate jump, an explosion, and it was over. "Shit, that was close," Issei hissed, heart pounding in his ears. "So close," said Judas, not hiding his disappointment. They were at the beginning of a long corridor, the walls a series of screens like in a traditional Chinese tea house. It opened up in a large restaurant area, with tables not only on the floor, but also in several galleries along the walls. One level up, facing the entrance and sitting on a mound of luxurious cushions, was Boss. Unlike Issei, whose wiry frame relied on speed, Boss's huge frame rippled with muscles. He was wearing a large grey cloak with a white trim at the collar over a grey business suit and a swirling tattoo covered his bald head. Next to him stood a small girl in dirty clothes, 3 years old at the most. Her hair was tied in a ponytail that reached to her ankles and she was holding a small tin serving tray in her hands. About her neck was a collar and chain, the end of which was held firmly in Boss's huge paw. "Issei!" shouted Judas, who no one else could hear. "Say something cool, like her." "Thank you for ordering from Hobo Pizzas," drawled Issei, repeating Judas's words mechanically. "Please enjoy your cheese fee." He looked down at his hands, affecting an air of surprise. "It was here a second ago." Boss erupted into laughter. "You have got some balls." He chortled. The faint smile danced across the tramp's face. "I'm amazed I can even walk." Boss snapped his fingers and someone threw a sheathed katana from one of the side galleries. Issei caught it without looking. A ninja in a white kabuki mask, of all things, dropped down from the ceiling and landed in a crouch on Boss's left. An instant later and their faces were inches apart, Issei blocking the ninja's blade with his own sheathed one. But the powerful swing on Issei's part, the other man was flung through the air, landing with cat-like grace in the gallery. As 6 more ninjas landed around him, Issei dropped a sword, and in a maelstrom, a storm, a tornado, his punches blurred forth, hurling the goons away from him with deep, fist-shaped indentations on their ass. Again without looking, Issei caught the grenade thrown from the gallery and threw it back. As flames consumed the eastern wall, Issei hurled himself into a roll to avoid the first ninja as he leapt fearlessly through the flames. Grabbing the abandoned sword as he went, Issei swung his wrist and sent the sheath flying before lunging forward. The kabuki ninja leaned back impossibly far, the blade inches from his nose before back-flipping away, forcing Issei into manageable range with a rising kick. His mask fell to the ground, cut perfectly in half. "The white guy," said Issei dryly. "They make Caucasian ninjas." The man lunged forward, but Issei tapped his sword aside, then pressed forward in a series of smooth strikes. The other man was forced to back away while dodging frantically until seemingly tripping and falling on his back. As Issei closed in, he uncoiled like a spring, both feet slamming into Issei's and launching him magnificently into the air. He followed up with an impressive jump, but his thrust was again deflected. Issei swung his sword twice, and the ninja felt 2 stings on the backs of his thighs. The flat of Issei's sword smacked the other man in the face and sent him tumbling to the floor. He landed awkwardly on his front, finding he could no longer move his legs. He managed to force himself up with his hands just as Issei descended, gravity adding force as the back of his blade slammed into the ninja's skull. Boss raised an eyebrow as his minion fell. "Not bad." The hulking monster cut himself off and whirled around, lifting a chair over his head with one hand in an attempt to crush the little girl. And then the odd hobo was there, blocking the hit with his sword. Boss couldn't help but notice that, in his instant of movement, Issei had broken the chain around the girl's neck. "Head back," ordered the smaller man. "Leave this to me." The girl did as he said and scrambled away. Yeah, laughed boss, abandoning the chair and making some distance. Leave us alone. Can't you see the grown-ups want to talk? Issei darted forward, but his swipe went under boss's feet as the larger man jumped vertically, smashing through the ceiling to the roof. Issei tossed his weapon aside and leapt after him. It wasn't what he was expecting. Boss had renovated the roof of his building into a beautiful garden, a garden lacking in variety of color, but of a lush verdant green one usually only sees after recent rain. At the opposite end from where he was standing was a platform shielded from the elements by a tiled roof, and in the center stood a huge mossy rock, upon which stood boss. If this were some cheesy battle manga, then they would trash talk each other for a few minutes before coming to blows, stopping every so often to go into lengthy descriptions of their attacks. However, this was reality. Boss was a master martial artist. When he went all out he used a form of Shaolin monk kung fu. In order to allow himself flexibility between open and closed-fisted martial arts, he had learned both metal fist and tiger claw techniques. Backing it were his incredible endurance, placing any battle of attrition in his advantage, and strength that could and would break concrete. Issei had no presence at all. He just stood there, completely non-threatening and harmless. Deep inside, Boss admitted to himself that this, the ability to force the opponent to underestimate you, was easily the strongest weapon one could have. Boss knew for a fact that it was an act because of what he had seen in the instant he had attacked the girl. The notions of Kai and killer intent may be overplayed in Eastern fiction, but they had genuine roots in reality. For those of Boss's level, they acquired an instinct forged in fire, telling them through sheer gut intuition when someone wants them dead. However, it is only during a fight between two masters that the phenomenon truly blossoms. It required, of course, a certain amount of imagination on the fighter's part. The most accurate word to describe it would be hallucination. Sensing the incoming threat, the warrior's mind creates an image they associate with the feel of the other, briefly superimposing the image before their mind caught up with reality. Boss had seen a huge blue eastern dragon soar through the air and snip the girl's chain with its jaws. The dragon's head wasn't Issei's sword, he found, but his fist. He broke a steel chain with the tips of his fingers, and Boss found that very interesting indeed. The color Boss had found gave one a fairly accurate impression of the other's emotions and mental state. Generally speaking, blue was lucidity and orange was turmoil. The transcendent sapphire of the dragon spoke of calm confidence and worse terrifying battle experience. As Boss jumped forward to make the first blow, a steel-rending tiger claw strike, an image of an immense tiger appeared, his Kai dyeing it a fiery orange. In contrast, Issei's dragon was pitifully small, wrapping itself tightly about his body with its head at his wrist. Time slowed to a crawl as Boss fell through the air. As he watched, the imaginary dragon coiled itself about the hobo's left forearm, spinning and contracting until there was a small, focused whirlwind of Kai swirling about his fist. And then it did something Boss had never seen happen before in his life. His Kai turned a deep crimson red. Boss felt rather than saw the fist hit his ribcage. In the instant as physics fought to catch up with Issei's tremendous speed, Boss heard the other master speak a single word, and the word was Todome. The enormous man was sent hurtling 15 meters through the air. As he flew over the edge of the roof and fell to certain death, his last thoughts were of satisfaction. For Boss knew he was a true master for seeing through the complexity of that incredible, reality-defying punch. Before Boss even hit the ground, Issei was in front of the little girl he came to save. He knelt before the frightened child and showed her the picture he had shown the receptionist. The photo depicted her and two other girls, only just entering their teens, and a young man in his 20s. "Are you Hina?" The poor child didn't even realize she was crying. "Your family sent me. I'm here to take you home. Everything is going to be alright." For once, Judas had nothing to say. "I know," sobbed Issei, head in his hands. "Believe me, I know." He was in the town square, sitting on the edge of a fountain. The area around him was bustling with life, the pedestrians either ignoring him or walking in large circles to avoid him. He was a filthy, ranting hobo. You would too. If you know, then why are we sitting here when there's a gorgeous bombshell over there licking lollipops at you? Indeed, the girl sitting in the outdoor cafe was doing her level best to arouse his attention. She was devouring the lucky treat in her hands with such provocative flair that the waiters had taken to bringing her a new one every time it got too small, due to the influx of male customers she was attracting. Issei, however, was nonplussed. "Judas, have you picked up her skirt yet?" "Yes." "Then we're done here." He stood up and walked away without a backwards glance. "Oh, come on. She has long black hair, which means she's totally my type, and big tits, which means she's yours. How is this not a jackpot? So far, you have sent me after 246 girls with long black hair," said Issei, with the air of one who has had this conversation many, many times before. 112 of them slapped me, 83 of them punched me, 25 of them kicked me in the balls, 15 were married, 10 were out to kill me, and one of them turned out to be a man. It was dark, said Judas defensively. You were fooled at first too. My point is, if it's female and has long dark hair, then it's probably planning to do something horrible to me before I can say is that a Gurkha knife. It's not that bad. What are the odds that, just because of her hair, she's going to? Hello. Both Issei and Judas gave a panicked scream, the former leaping a foot into the air and the latter going completely unnoticed. The girl from earlier had stepped out of the alleyway in front of him, giving such a cheerful and unsurprised greeting that she could have only been waiting in ambush. Sorry if I startled you, she murmured, a bit taken aback by their shock. My name is Yuma Amano. Issei took a wary step backwards. Didn't I leave you behind at the cafe? Oh, Yuma blushed demurely. So you noticed me. Well, the truth is, Ian, this is so embarrassing. Tap that. Screamed Judas desperately. Tap it, you tea-drinking son of a bitch. I set off before you, said Issei, carefully analyzing all possible escape routes. You would have had to run full pelt to make it ahead of me. That or the ability of flight. Or teleportation. Well, I was just so excited to meet you, she said shyly. I've seen you around town, and… No, said Issei firmly. Just no. You're not going to do this to me. I won't be dragged into your pace, not again. Do you know why? Why? Because you're a whore. He snarled. Because your horniness reeks from you like the putrid vapors of a demon's testicles, because it drips from you like the snot of an aroused pedophile. So you know what I say to you? I say fuck you. And fuck your fucking mother too. In a sharp sideways kick, Issei slashed his foot into the nearby fire hydrant, crushing it like a plastic bottle. The girl staggered backwards as the pressurized water exploded upwards, and by the time she regained her bearings he was gone. Hooray for needless paranoia. Son of a fucking whore. What the fuck is going on? Fuck this fuck. I sense you are upset, said Issei calmly. Let's talk about our feelings. I'm going to eat your soul. And how do you feel about that? Brah. Issei was in a park, a fair distance away from where he had met the stalker girl. The patrolling officer for the area, an attractive young woman he had once saved from rapists, allowed him to sleep there at night, provided he didn't mess up the flower beds. His favorite spot was under a large bush, which had grown in such a way that a small, enclosed space could be found, shielded from prying eyes by the dense foliage. It kept the worst of the rain off, though if he lay straight his feet would poke out and trip passers-by. As was the case today. Issei was just dozing off, despite Judas's enraged screams, when he felt someone with very thin legs trip over his feet and begin to curse in an unladylike manner. Like the hard-bitten bat as he was, Issei went hurtling to his feet, hit his head on a branch, and started a steady list of every swear word Judas had ever taught him, while the dark spirit in question laughed his ass off in the background. Two faces, one annoyed and one amused, greeted him as he emerged from the bush. They were girls, and he had met them both before. The annoyed one was 14, with short brown hair held back by a blue ribbon. The amused one was 10, and had extremely long blonde hair tied into twintails by a pair of matching red ribbons. They were half-sisters, siblings to the girl Issei had rescued from boss the other day. What the hell are you two doing here? He said rudely. Tripping over your feet. Snarled the elder sister. Show some consideration to innocent pedestrians, you slob. Well, excuse me for being homeless. Issei shot back. Some of us aren't as lucky and privileged as you are. And you, hello. Hi Issei, smiled the blonde. Hey, it's hard for us to stay together. It takes hours of extra work just so we don't get separated, but you? You don't eat, you don't drink, you barely sleep, and yet you're healthy enough to punch through concrete. And why can't you say hello to me like you do to her? Because you're a damn shrew, that's why. Well, you're filthy, hairy, smelly, and literally too ashamed to show your face in public. Huh. She had him there. Especially with that last part. The scarf he kept permanently wrapped around his lower face hadn't been moved in several months. Sagawa likes big boobs. You shithead. The brunette roared, lunging for his dot. Sora, wait. We can't afford a lawyer. Shouted Mew, desperately tackling her sister to the ground. Meanwhile, Judas. You was still an asshole. So anyway, said Issei once everyone had calmed down. What's up? Ah, said Sora, suddenly remembering this wasn't a social visit. That's right. Something terrible's happened to Ani-chan. Sagawa's finally lost his virginity. Was Judas's first response. Sagawa's finally lost his virginity. Repeated Issei, who believed that since he had to put up with Judas, everyone else should too. The hell? Thundered Sora. Where did that come from? Well, logically, whenever you go into these tantrums, it usually means Sagawa's being hit on by some girl. Tantrums? She snarled. Yes, Issei nodded heedlessly. You have this yodeling roar. Yodeling? Her voice had now risen several octaves. Shrieking, perhaps. Issei suggested. Shrieking. She shrieked. Ahem. coughed Mew loudly, finally getting the discussion back on track. Sora, will you stop getting sidetracked? This is imper. She was cut off as Issei stood and placed his hands on her shoulders. His eyes had gone dead cold. That is the first time I have ever seen you snap at anyone, ever. He said seriously. What's wrong with Sagawa? For most of his adolescent life, Issei had been involved with organized crime. In particular, he had possessed high standing with the Triads, though he hadn't spoken with them in so long he was now merely a legend spoken of in hushed whispers. During this tenure he had had a great deal of experience with one of the more romanticized aspects of the gangs. Fight Club. The business was taking place in a backstreet alley, in an area the size of a half basketball court walled off by a wire fence. Gathered around the fence were a few dozen men plus a few women, all of them screaming for blood. Inside the arena were two combatants, and one of them wasn't looking so hot. Wait, he stammered, backing away fearfully. I surrender, I've lost, so please. I'm not done, snarled the other man, advancing slowly on his victim. He was a giant of a man, with shaggy brown hair that reached past his shoulders and a face hidden by a worn ski mask. He was wearing a black muscle shirt, black fingerless gloves, green pants and brown boots. And the other guy? He was just an ordinary dude. Take one of my punches, the taller man growled. And if you happen to live, I'll let you go. By this point the small man had started frantically pulling on the gate, which was wired shut. He gave up and turned around just in time to see a fist the size of his head rocketing towards his face. The only thing that saved him was his legs giving way. The punch punctured straight through the fence and hit a man on the other side, reducing his face to a bloody wreck. Both him and the gate itself were sent hurtling through the air, straight over the heads of their audience. The losing combatant could only sit there as his opponent prepared for a second swing. No, he croaked. I'll die. The fist came down. At the first swing, the crowd went wild. At the second, they fell silent. The expected spatter of blood and gore was absent. Instead. Sagawa, said Issei, patting his friend on the shoulder. We are going to have words after this. They were both standing up straight, as though one of them hadn't just yanked the other away from certain death. Next to them, the bigger man was still kneeling with his fist embedded in the concrete. Literally, as the ground had ruptured with his punch. There was a rule in this arena. Unless both fighters acknowledge the fight is over, the fight continues. Even if, as was the case today, one party has clearly lost. There was zero tolerance for any third-party interference. In years past none had ever dared to break this rule, as it was set by the one man the whole underworld feared, who had made even Boss cower in fear, who had no name but his alias. Tornado. To save his friend, Issei had crossed the one man who should never be crossed. You looking to die? Snarled the big man, flakes of concrete falling from his knuckles as he stood up. The crowd had started shouting again, yelling encouragements to a person called Av, so that was probably him. I was just saving my friend, said Issei, smoothly stepping between the two fighters. That's not a problem, is it? The eyes behind the mask glared with murderous flames, his only thought to rip the person in front of him to shreds. The fight's fuse was ignited and soon there would be an explosion. You know, observed Judas calmly. I think he seriously wants to kill you. Ever since Av had started fighting, all the matches he had fought were easily won, the opponents were basically his punching bags. Who else but Issei could? Beep beep. Beep beep. Av reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital watch. He pressed a button on the side and the alarm stopped. You got lucky, he grunted and calmly walked out of the arena. The entire crowd followed him and within minutes Issei and Sagawa were the only ones there. Is that it? Wondered Issei aloud. Really? Sagawa let out a massive breath. Thanks, man. If you hadn't showed up, I'd have been. Issei's fist cracked down on the roof of his skull. The fuck you Uda. Have you any idea what this place is? How worried your nieces were? Sagawa flinched from the onslaught. Issei only called him by name when he was pissed. I'm sorry, I thought I was only going to fight small fries. Sagawa, that was no small fry. You could have been maimed for life, or worse, killed. What the hell were you trying to prove? I needed the money. Sagawa snapped, almost crying from fear and guilt and stress. Debt after debt and I can't earn fast enough to pay them. The arena was my last shot. You could always sell your body, suggested Judas unhelpfully, though of course Sagawa couldn't hear him. If nothing else, Sora would probably. As he always did, Issei ignored him. How much do you owe? 28 million. Sagawa hunched his shoulders, the weight of his situation heavy and his Issei wouldn't help him, they didn't even know each other that well. He had just bumped into him a few times at the park. Issei had no obligation to. Take it, said Issei. It was the 5th time he had repeated himself, so deep was Sagawa in emo dem. He was holding out him the same roll of notes he had shown Rias. Everything he had. You can pay me back later. It's better to pay back your debts. Sagawa didn't argue, but quietly accepted the money. "Thank you," he whispered, not quite knowing how to react when faced with Issei's kindness. Because a true friend might not call themselves your friend, but they will always help you in your time of need. "Now come on, your nieces are waiting." Sora and Mew sobbed their eyes out when they saw the state their uncle was in, but Hina, the girl Issei had rescued from Boss, didn't immediately notice them. She was holding the hand of a girl Issei had never met before, and none only a few years older than Sora. She was quite short, only up to Issei's bicep, and had long blonde hair and bright green eyes. Little Hina was babbling to her happily as the nun nodded along absently, eyeing the wall curiously. Then Hina noticed them and, humiliatingly, ran to Issei first. "Itch. Itch." She latched onto his leg like a monkey, and with a casual flick of the ankle Issei sent her hurtling skywards, squealing with delight. Finally, having noticed what he was doing, the nun gaped as he calmly held out his hand and caught her as she fell, placing the giggling 3-year-old on his shoulders. "Upside daisy for Badices." "Hello," he said politely, ignoring the horror on her face. "Are you the one who's been looking after Hina?" "What? Oh, why yes." She stammered in Italian. She didn't understand what he said, but merely got the gist. "I just met Sora and Mew earlier today and..." "You guys left Hina with someone you just met?" said Issei, who spoke Japanese, Chinese, Italian and English fluently. "More like, you could understand her." "Just me," said Mew, while Sora continued to berate his friend. "And we were panicking. Aji-chan was." "Oh, dear," gasped the nun, finally noticing Sagawa's injuries. "Are you alright?" He tried to protest, but she ignored him. Cupping her hands over his face, a soothing green light flowed out from her fingers and washed his cuts away. Within minutes, the worst of Sagawa's wounds were gone. "I know," said Mew. "Trippy. BFFT. Old trick," snorted Judas dismissively. "Thank you," said Issei in Italian. "That was very kind of you." The girl blinked in surprise. Well, that was just anyway. I have to get to a church somewhere in this town, but I'm afraid I'm a bit lost." "No problem," nodded Issei, who knew she was hiding something and knew better than anyone to respect people's privacy. "If you like, I can take you there." "Really?" Her face lit up and Judas made an improper comment about Issei possibly getting laid. "That would be wonderful, thank you. My name is Asia Argento, it's very nice to meet you." "Issei Haidu," he nodded. "Likewise." He told the others that he would be escorting the nice lady home, deposited Hina in her eldest sister's arms, and waved as the quartet departed. Before they followed suit, Asia tugged at his sleeve and pointed to the wall. "Is there a wild animal on the loose?" "Huh?" Scattered across the wall were dozens of scratches, rents torn through the rock. At first glance they appeared to be random, but they're all the same length, muttered Issei, running one dirty hand across the wall. And each slash was done with 4 digits. "Feel the inside, it's too smooth to have been done with an edge." "What does that mean?" wondered Asia nervously. "It means this was done with some dude's fingers," Issei grunted. "It's possible, provided you strengthen your fingers to a proper degree." "Wow," whispered Asia, who believed him instantly. "Can people really do that?" In answer, Issei began to walk away, casually raising his hand towards an untarnished wall. The scars he left may as well have been done in sand for all the effort it took him. Eyes wide, Asia scampered after him and began to barrage him with questions, but Issei just laughed behind his mask. Does it not bother you?" asked Asia, after they had been walking for a while. "My powers, that is." "Hell no," snorted Issei. "I've seen way worse from people more violent, scary, crude, crass, perverted and ugly than you could ever be." "I'm not ugly," said Judas. "But yeah, no worries. It's a power made for helping people. You should be proud." "Proud," she murmured, eyes downcast. Right after a few moments she quietly whispered, "Issei-san, do you believe in God?" "Sure I do." He nodded, surprising her. "The proof of his existence stalks me everywhere I go." "I'm not a stalker." "Stop calling me one." "Really?" gasped Asia, obviously not getting the stalking comment. "You really believe?" "Yes I do," said Issei. "What I don't believe is that he's all-loving." Asia looked truly, utterly horrified. "How could you possibly say that?" "Look at me," said Issei. "Do I look like God loves me?" She opened her mouth to say yes he did. But not a word came out as she realized that no, he didn't. "Everything I have ever had has been taken from me. My family, my respect, my livelihood, even my free will. My humanity itself may as well be in question with the way people look at me, and you tell me this higher power still cares?" He glanced at Asia, who had fallen silent. "But why do you treat me normally, scum of the earth that I am?" "I don't believe in judging based on appearances," whispered the nun. "I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt." It wasn't the first time someone had said this to him, and it wasn't the first time he thought they meant it, but it was the first time he believed it to be true. He placed his hand on her head and she started slightly in surprise. God loves you, said Issei, with conviction. If he exists, even if he isn't all-loving and even if he doesn't love me, God loves you. Count on it. It made her day. Now this church, have you ever been there before? No, but they should be expecting me, said Asia cheerfully. Ah, there it is. The place was a bit old and could have used a lick of paint, but Issei didn't think it was too bad. Right, this is where I leave. Thanks again for taking care of the brat. No, she wasn't any trouble, said Asia, grabbing his sleeve to stop him from leaving. But you don't have to go right now. Would you like some tea? Ladies? No thank you, said Issei politely, smiling behind his mask. But maybe if we ever meet again. He stood and waved as the sweet girl ran inside, then waited a moment on the pavement. 112 slaps, he began. 83 punches, 25 kicks in the balls, 15 married, 10 out to kill me, 1 man he slowly turned around. And 1 fallen angel. She floated there, crow-black wings spread behind her along with 3 others, a man with a trench coat, a girl in a gothic Lolita outfit and a woman in a revealing purple suit. Below them was a small army of thugs, complete with black trench coats, black face masks and lightsabers. Don't say a word. Don't take rejection well do you, Yuma Amano? Drawled Issei. Or should I say, Ama no Yuma? So you've heard of me? Smirked the stalker girl. Not at all, it was just a very transparent and unimaginative pseudonym. A wave of snickers broke out through the mooks, and the other fallen angels laughed openly. The stalker girl's face burned red. You filthy bastard. She snarled. You should be honored when offered one as beautiful as me. So you would have let me tap you? Said Issei in surprise. Damn, if I'd known it'd get me laid I'd have played Halo. He ducked as a spear of red light hurtled through the space his head had been occupying, embedding itself in the pavement behind him. You little shit. The stalker girl snarled. I'm going to impale your head on my bedpost. Pinky. You are not endearing yourself to this woman. Shoot him. Shrieked the stalker girl. Shoot him now. The bullets that swept towards Issei were different to the ones fired by boss's henchmen. They were made of light literally, made of light and were much faster. They wouldn't harm him as badly as they would, say, a devil, but they would burn and penetrate deep into his body. In theory. In practice, he just stood there and waited until they stopped. There were no visible effects on his body. As though he wasn't being attacked at all. How boring. Issei yawned and began to trudge forward. The rain of gunfire started up again, but it made no difference. As he reached the crowd they began to drop their weapons, hurriedly backing away from the seemingly invulnerable man. Realizing what he was going to do the stalker girl tried to escape, but Issei jumped, grabbed a hold of her ankle, and brought her to the ground with a crash. It's not nice to attack people you know, Issei began. He sat on her abdomen, with his legs pinning her arms. I think you need to be punished. Right there and then, in front of all her subordinates, he put his hands on her tits and squeezed. Hein. She gasped, and a shocked murmur ran through the thugs. Neither they nor the other fallen angels moved to help her, however. They merely watched, as if in a trance. Go for it Issei. Shouted Judas excitedly. Just like I taught you. To his eternal shame, Issei had indeed been taught numerous related techniques over the course of their relationship, which he proceeded to dish out now onto the one of dominatrix. Now, he purred, rolling his palms provocatively. It's not punishment if you enjoy it. Why you be bastard, she protested weakly. I swear I'll, get you be back for this. You know, said Issei thoughtfully, suddenly becoming more aggressive with his ministrations. It's really quite convenient that you're not wearing a bra. The fallen angel fell even further, her wide gasps turning to torturous screams as the assorted minions looked on. Please, she whimpered. Please, esto haya, stop. Not until you say, I'm sorry, please forgive me Issei-sama. For a moment, he thought he'd gone too far. I'm so sorry, she gasped. As her shirt became see-through with sweat, Issei got a good look at what he was groping. Please forgive me, Issei-sama. Again, he whispered, getting into his role. Say my name. Issei, she said. Issei her body arched beneath him and he suddenly realized what was happening. Sama. She screamed, going tense for several seconds before going limp. Even Issei was surprised. I said Judas, sounding like he may burst into tears at any moment. I'm so proud of you. Right, said Issei, ignoring him. Anyone else? Yes please the goth lowly was interrupted as the older fallen angel bonked her on the head. I mean, no thanks. Okay, nodded Issei. See ya. And with that. He just walked out of there. Ria's cut a cliché, but romantic silhouette against the sunset. Her chin propped on the heel of her left hand, she gazed out the classroom window with eyes brimming with emotion. She gave a heavy forlorn sigh, and the air echoed with the squeals of fangirls. What the hell's up with her? wondered Sona from where she was digging into her lunch at a nearby table. Tsubaki and Akeno sat on her right and left respectively. Usually they would be joined by Rias, but apparently she had forgotten they existed. "I'm glad you asked," grinned Akeno, rejoicing at the opportunity to cause chaos. Over the weekend our Rias had a fated encounter. Everyone in the room suddenly started listening in. Sona frowned. I don't understand." "A man, Sona, it's a man." Though both were blunted by their glasses, the look she got still dripped skepticism. "I'm serious this time." "Right," grunted Tsubaki. "And who is it this time?" "A hobo." Sona choked on her rice and had to cough heartily before she got any words out. "What the cough, what the foo." "I know," beamed Akeno happily. He was tall and strong and the filthiest person I'd ever seen. And his eyes were this burning blue color, as in they literally burned. "Hang on," croaked Sona, finally getting a hold of herself. "Why don't we backtrack to the hobo part? Is that discrimination against the homeless?" "Akeno," murmured Tsubaki, who seemed to be in a state of shock. "Is Rias really hot for a hobo?" "We saw him beat up a purse snatcher and struck up a conversation with him," said Akeno nostalgically. "I say that, but Rias did most of the talking. They were off in their own little world, all gooey and lovey-dovey. I was the third wheel, to be honest." "Akeno." The trio looked up to see the redhead in question, glaring down at them balefully. "Stop telling people about this. It's annoying." "You mean it's true?" gasped Tsubaki, and Rias turned pink. "It is not," she snarled. "Issei and I are just friends." Akeno smirked. "So you're on a first-name basis?" Rias blinked for a moment, then turned a little redder. "So what? That proves nothing." "So when you were staring wistfully at the window earlier, you weren't imagining his face reflected in the glass?" "How did I mean no. No, I was not." "Holy shit," whispered Sona. "You a hobo." "Stop it," hissed Rias. "It's love." Akeno finished for her. "Nay, destiny." "It's not." Rias almost screamed, well aware that her classmates were becoming more interested by the minute. "It's not love, it's not destiny, and I'm probably never going to see him again. Now will you all please drop it?" The door slid open. "Excuse me? Is this Rias Gremory's class?" Rias froze. That voice, it couldn't be. It was. There he stood, in all his ragged glory. His clothes were still filthy. His tangled hair was still forced down by that battered fedora. The scar still hid his face. And his eyes still smoldered with that unexplainable fire that made her cheeks burn in her close-up. The awkward self-consciousness returned with a vengeance. "Ah, there you are," nodded Issei, weaving through the shocked students towards her. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "Issei," she croaked, her lips feeling very dry. "What are you? Why are you?" Akeno stood up smoothly. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she smiled, laughing on the inside. "My name is Akeno Himejima." "Issei," said Issei, shaking her hand politely. "Now, Rias, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." "What is it?" Her voice cracked slightly. She wanted to talk to him somewhere private, but knew the rumors would be 10 times worse if she did. "Well, I was sleeping in the shopping district yesterday when the classroom door slammed open." "Eyes!" shouted a boy whose name she couldn't place. "Did you catch the news last night? A homeless guy took out 6 armed thugs, robbing a jewelry store with his bare hands." Everyone looked at Issei. "Right," he nodded. "Well, looks like I don't have to explain about that then." Everyone but Rias, who was still in shock, began to murmur furiously. "The guy who owned the store was pretty grateful, so he told me I could have any one thing from his shop free of charge. I was going to sell it to a fence when I realized a pause. I don't know any fence." Rias blinked slowly. She was starting to get a hold of herself. "But what does that have to do with me, Issei?" He reached inside his coat, which apparently had inside pockets, and pulled out a small oblong box. It was wrapped in white packaging and a red ribbon. "Here," he said gruffly. "I don't need it." She took the package and started to stare at it stupidly. Her cheeks vaguely felt like they were about to catch fire. "That was all I came here for," grunted Issei. "So I think I'll just leave." He leaned towards her, and her cheeks turned even redder. "Your classmate staring is seriously creeping me out." Of course, the whole room heard him. As he approached the door, the school guidance counselor stepped through to block the way. He was a tall, leathery and heavily muscled man wearing a dark leather jacket with jeans, and the hilt of an intimidating black handgun poked out of his jacket. "The hell?" he barked coarsely. "What's a tramp doing on school grounds?" "Sorry, sir," said Issei politely. "I was just leaving." As he tried to move around him, a gun barrel blocked his way. "Now see here," said the counselor, who obviously had more testosterone than sense. "People like you don't deserve to be walking around a nice school like this. Why are you here, anyway? Filthy scum like you, walking around like they own the place makes me sick, I tell you." Beggars should stay on the streets where they bellow. There was a flicker of movement. Quickly and gracefully, Issei had raised his hand and inserted his thumb behind the gun's trigger, smoothly barring him from firing it. "Never call me that," said Issei softly. "I am no beggar." The counselor released his weapon and staggered back. Issei calmly pocketed the deadly firearm, then stepped coldly from the room. Ria stared after him for a few moments, then quietly opened the box. The slim gold chain held the tiny charm in place and felt strangely silky as it ran between her fingers. The charm was a sliver of red, a gem she didn't recognize that caught the afternoon light in just the right way. A pair of tiny gold wings wrapped around it in a loving embrace, whilst a second pair was spread boldly behind it. For a moment she held it up, imagining the red gem was her and the embracing wings were Issei. But a low gasp reminded her she was not alone. She stuffed the necklace back in its box, put the box in her desk, sat down and stared resolutely out the window until the teacher arrived. Elsewhere. "Fucking prick." Issei snarled to himself, storming furiously down the street. "Calling me a fucking beggar. The fuck he think he is? Fucker's lucky I'm so fucking laid back. If this were back in the day I'd have cut his hands off and burned his house." "Really?" said Judas, who was actually starting to get a little intimidated. "Don't you think that's a little harsh for calling you a name?" "Not really," grunted Issei, still trying to calm himself down. "It's a fairly common punishment on the streets. You cut off one or both hands, stuff them in a freezer bag and forget about them. That way they can be reattached once you're feeling more forgiving." Sometimes, Judas forgot how much of a bastard Issei could be. He was good with kids, fought crime and had a strong sense of justice. But after he ditched the triads he left a bloody legend in his wake. He was kind, gentle, friendly and a ruthless cold-blooded monster. Actually, when he put it like that, Judas realized how similar the two of them really were. "Well, you don't own a freezer, so why don't we go rob an ice cream cart or something and forget all about it?" "Ice cream sounds good," nodded Issei, knowing he would feel better afterwards. Following that irritating tune we are all familiar with, they had soon tracked down an ice cream van parked near a preserved grassy area. A small child was screaming at his mother for a scoop, and as the owner was preoccupied, Issei snuck in the back. Of course, it was right in the middle of his impromptu larceny that Judas screamed in his ear as loudly as he could, "Ice cream for ice cream." Issei straightened in surprise, cursing loudly as his head thumped against the ceiling. It was only his superhuman reflexes that let him escape before he was seen, taking a single Magnum Classic with him as he went. "You asshole," snarled Issei, once more storming down the street. "You planned that. You ha 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 ha. Head." Issei grouchily tore the wrapper off his Magnum, then carefully disposed of it in a trash can. He raised a chocolatey treat to his lips. Then dropped it, dashing forward in a panic. Issei had been walking towards the rougher part of town, where the Fight Club and the finger scars could be found, and had been intending on asking Sagawa if he had managed to pay back his debt. He found his answer when the man in question staggered out of an alley, blood leaking from his mouth and nose, and his right eye swollen shut. He was limping and holding his ribs, and more blood stained his shirt and pants. Sagawa straightened as he saw his friend, but his leg gave out under the pressure. Issei just barely caught him. "Uda," hissed Issei, carefully laying him on the ground. "What happened?" "Issei," sobbed Sagawa. "The money you gave me, it's all gone." His eyes began to tear up with disappointment, guilt and self-loathing. Issei knew it was because he was a poor fighter. As though not wanting to hurt people made you less of a man. "I'm so sorry." There, hushed Issei, as Judas only watched in the background. "Just calm down. I was going to the casino to pay off my debt, but some people jumped me and took the money." Tears of shame poured from his eyes once more, and Issei cursed inwardly. "Yuda didn't deserve this. All of it. It's all gone." "How did they know, Yuda?" hissed Issei urgently. "How did they know you had the money?" "I met my loan shark on the way there," gasped Sagawa. "He wanted me to sell my body parts, but I told him I already had the money." "Then he's probably the one behind this," said Issei darkly. "Tell me his name, Sagawa." "Shinyi," croaked Sagawa. "From the Longcheng gang." "I'll go ask him," smiled Issei coldly. "And if he's behind it, I'll cut off both his hands." "No, you've helped me enough. I'll pay my debt somehow," grunted Yuda, struggling to his feet. "The Longcheng gang controls the whole area. If you cross them." Shinyi was the treasurer, an important figure in the gang. All the gang's sources of income, drugs, prostitution, extortion, everything was checked by Shinyi. Even if the head of the gang needed money, he'd have to go through Shinyi. As such, Shinyi was highly influential within the gang. "I don't care," snarled Issei. "I hate people who prey on the weak. I'll end him. And Judas. Both breaker," came the unearthly growl. "Rip his legs off and fuck him with them." Elsewhere. "Well, I admit I'm surprised at your taste in men," said Kiba nonchalantly. "I'm happy for you, but you. I was starting to think that no man would ever live up to your standards. Riaz suddenly tripped over herself, then glared over her shoulder at Akeno. Damn it, how many people did you tell? Everyone. Grinned Akeno. They were walking around in an unused building on the edge of town. Apparently, a stray devil had been luring humans inside to feed. Did he really propose to you in the middle of class? Asked Kaneko curiously. A tiny smile crept over her face as Riaz turned pink. He did not. She snapped. He just gave me a necklace is all. You mean the one you're wearing right now? Wondered Kiba. She was, indeed, wearing Issei's gift. So what? Riaz stuttered, clutching the beautiful ornament to her. It's really nice. I doubt she'll ever take it off, smirked Akeno. Pretty. Agreed Kaneko. I will so take it off. Barked Riaz. It's not like I'm wearing it just because it was him who gave it to me. Just curious, said Kiba. But was that at Sundeer? It wasn't, no. Smiled Akeno, noting with pleasure that Riaz was close to blowing her top. At Sundeer is when you're dishonest about your feelings specifically to the person you like. When they're actually together she's as dear as they come. Seriously, they're just so cute together. Akeno stop. Shouted Riaz, stomping her foot angrily. You should bring him to the clubroom sometime, continued Kiba recklessly. I would like to see what sort of man my master has chosen. Bring the boyfriend to meet the folks. Nodded Kaneko quietly. That's it. Shouted Riaz, finally losing patience and whirling on her amused servants. The next time anyone brings up Issei or anything about him you're all on flyer duty for a year. Do I make myself clear? Perfectly. Smiled Akeno insincerely. Crystal. Nodded Kiba. Did he? Murmured Kaneko, who was genuinely interested. Without warning, a still bleeding human torso flopped onto the ground nearby. Visitors, hissed a sibilant new voice. Such pretty red hair. Soon your body's all be stained the same color. A massive figure stepped from the darkness. From the waist up it looked like a voluptuous female, while from the waist down her body became the neck of a huge quadrupedal monster. The beast half was vaguely feline, with thick black fur, sharp claws and a serpentine tail. Riaz didn't even introduce herself. She just raised her hand, calling forth a huge red magic circle in the air overhead. Without fanfare, dozens of orbs of power of destruction poured from its center like machine gun bullets. Though the devil was obliterated in the first few seconds, the onslaught continued for several minutes, giving Riaz some much-needed stress relief. When she finally tired herself out, Riaz turned to view her servants' reactions. Biba looked intimidated, Kaneko had no reaction she could see, and Akeno had openly started laughing, though whether it was at her master's embarrassment or sadism wasn't certain. Let's get the hell out of here, she snapped. Elsewhere. The air of the casino was foggy with sweat and cigarette smoke. Numerous men and women dressed in dirty clothing crowded around the various cramped tables, shouting and laughing coarsely as they tried their luck at the various games and challenges on offer. Those not used to it would describe it as a den of sin. Those who were used to it would call it a simple recreational center. Issei, let's leave. Said Sagawa nervously, trailing behind the glowering hobo. Against all suggestions to the contrary, he had decided to see the situation through, rather than get his injuries fixed. Keep walking. Issei was forced to disobey his own command as 3 men stood in their way. 4 more moved to surround them as a particularly muscular individual, their apparent leader, began to speak. Hey buddy, he grunted, trying to look intimidating. Did Sagawa get his money from you? I'm here for Shinyi, said Issei shortly. Tell him to get over here. Who do you think you are? Said a blonde man with a nasally voice. You think our boss is free to meet scum like you? Abruptly, the blonde noticed Sagawa hovering timidly behind Issei's back. Ah, Sagawa. You here to pay your debt? Where's the money? Didn't you rob it from him already? Snarled Issei, and the blonde immediately got up in his face. What did you just say? He blustered, poking his finger into the filthy man's. Do you want me to kick you out? Threats count as hostile behavior, said Judas helpfully. So it's cool if you punch him. Issei deliberately slowed the punch down, just so his friends could see as he hit the punk in the face. Anyone else feeling tough enough? He said coldly, as the thug landed senseless on a blackjack table that quickly buckled under his weight. You have guts to start something here. Roared the leader, aiming a straight punch at Issei's face. He caught the blow with his left hand, then casually twisted. The thug screamed as his bones snapped and one of his friends made to help. Without releasing the first man's fist, Issei lunged and kicked him in the gut. By this point, the entire room had noticed what was going on. Shinyi's men, along with a good number of patrons, were coming forward to help. Many of them had weapons such as machetes, metal pipes and bar stools. Kill him. Someone shouted. That phrase again. Sighed Issei, motioning for Sagawa to stay back. I hate it. Well, it luoves you. Upstairs. Sir, said Shinyi's bodyguard, a typical mook with a black suit and sunglasses. There's a disruption downstairs. Should I take a look? Meh, not my problem. Came the reply, the clinking of an expensive abacus filling the room. After a few moments the sound stopped and the office's owner leaned his elbow on his desk. Heaps of documents and ledgers covered its surface, seemingly without organization. These accounts just don't add up. Came a frustrated sigh. The door burst from its hinges. A full-grown man was thrown across the room, sliding over the desk and scattering its contents across the floor. Two men, one injured, one filthy, stepped into the room. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" barked the bodyguard, moving protectively in front of his superior. "This is the Longcheng gang, you son of a..." "Wait," said Xin Yi, slowly rising from his chair. "Let's ask him why he attacked our men first." Xin Yi was a pale, slender young man of Chinese descent. He was in his mid-20s and had Bishounen good looks, with dark eyes and dyed pixie-styled blonde hair. He was wearing slim jeans with a black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to the elbow. Over it he was wearing a blue waistcoat. Both the shirt and the coat had been modified to expose his pectorals. Weak and surrounded by books, he looked like the average company worker. If he hadn't been sitting in the treasury, Issei would never have believed he was looking at the right hand of the Longcheng gang. "Are you Xin Yi?" asked Issei. "Drumroll please," drawled Judah sarcastically. "An answer is a promise and a word is 1,000 gold," responded Xin Yi, lighting a cigar with a golden lighter. "I'm about credit and the whole city knows it." "Credit?" growled Issei. "First you rob my friend and then you still want him to repay his debt. Is this your so-called credit?" Xin Yi took a slow puff on his cigar and met his burning eyes without fear. "I'm sorry, but could you tell me the whole story?" Gritting his teeth, Issei reluctantly told him Sagawa's piece. "The Longcheng gang is robbing its clients. It's dishonorable and pathetic. Why are you even discussing this? Just kill him and everyone else in the building." "To me, this seems simple," shrugged Xin Yi. "If our side really is at fault, then we'll pay you back. And Sagawa's debt will remain until the matter is cleared." "Bullshit," snarled Issei. "You let your gang do whatever they like but still have the nerve to claim credit." Xin Yi remained calm, but his courtesy turned ice cold. "You break into my territory, attack my men and speak as my equal. You do realize that a word from me is all it'll take to make you disappear forever. You trying to scare me?" returned Issei, and Xin Yi clearly saw that he hadn't. "I like this guy. He's got chutzpah." "I don't know what happened," sighed Xin Yi, hoping to calm everyone down. "But until I get to the bottom of this, you won't cause any more trouble." Issei brought his hand down hard on the desk. "You expect me to believe you?" "I don't know what happened," repeated Xin Yi, holding his gaze steadily. "If you don't believe me then go ahead and try something." Neither of them had any intention of backing down. The room was silent, the mood was frozen, and tensions rising, until... "I injured those people," said Issei suddenly. "Don't blame it on him. If you want revenge, it's me you should come after. I'll take the blame for all damages. Now we owe your gang nothing." "You're backing down? Now?" "I'm impressed," smiled Xin Yi. "But there will be a bill for the injured and Sagawa's debt is due today." He leaned forward. "I'll let you go for now, but once I find out what happened I will settle this with you." "That Xin Yi had a pretty nice temper," said Judas after they'd left. "You beat up all those guys and he just let you walk away." "Issei," murmured Sagawa, his limp less pronounced now that he wasn't focusing on it. "I'm a bad friend." "Don't say that," said Issei gruffly. "It was partly my fault as well. But this all happened because of me." Sagawa eyed his grimy friend out of the corner of his eye. "Why did you back off back there? It didn't seem like you." "I could tell from his eyes," grunted Issei. "His men tried to stop us when we talked about getting robbed, but Xin Yi was different. He listened, staring me straight in the eye. Unless he's really skilled, he couldn't have fooled me. Most likely, he really didn't know what his underlings were doing." Judas was silent as he had figured out what Issei was planning to do. "We'll have to pay him double," groaned Sagawa, rubbing tiredly between his eyes. "For the injuries and my debt. Go home and take a shower. By the time you're done, I'll have this settled." Sagawa blinked slowly. "How?" Issei had his hands behind his head and was twisting his waist from side to side as though warming up for some strenuous exercise. "Just go relax. Trust me." As Issei slowly walked away, it would have been far less awesome if Sagawa could hear Judas chanting "Fight Club. Fight Club" in the background. Meanwhile, at Ku Academy. "Eyes," said Riaz after they'd all gotten back from the devil hunt. "Tonight we're going to have a new client. Upon consideration, it's been decided that Kaneko will answer his initial summons." "Who is he?" "He has 3 nieces that have been living with him since their parents disappeared," explained Riaz. "Though whether or not you'll be interacting with any of them is uncertain. The summoner's name is Yuta Sagawa. Elsewhere. Asia, this is Fried Zelsen. said Reiner, gesturing to a white-haired young man wearing an exorcist's uniform. He'll be your partner from now on. Dia Asia-chan, said Fried cheerfully. Let's be bestest friends. Yes, said Asia, who always loved to make friends. Let's get along. Your first mission is tonight, said Denasiage, taking over the debriefing. Your target is a devil summoner. A devil summoner? Gasped Asia. Are you sure I can handle someone so awful? Asia-chan, chuckled Fried. I'll be doing all the dirty work, don't you worry. The target's name, continued Denasiage, annoyed at being interrupted, is Yuta Sagawa. Gambling tables. 3. 12,000 in Hong Kong dollars. Benches. 8. 6,740. The lights flickered off. Xin Yi stopped scribbling in his notebook, minced over the trashed furniture and unconscious thugs, and opened the den's windows. As the street lamps filled the room with light, he glanced at the fuse box on the far wall. At some point Issei had thrown a man at it, and it was now so dented they'd need special equipment to get it open. Lights, he continued. 7,000. He poked a groaning thug with one foot, tapping his pen against his lower lip. Injuries this swollen medical fees. Damn, are you redecorating or what? His sister, an attractive, short-haired girl a year younger than him, stepped into the room. Rather than worry at the scene of destruction, she instead skipped over the casualties to his side. So? Which group attacked us? Not a group. Mumbled Xin Yi, not looking up from his notes. A person. Her bubblegum popped. One. Who was it? Were they here for revenge? The pen stopped moving. His name was Issei. Issei Haidu. Never heard of him. The name was unfamiliar to me also. Xin Yi tore the paper from his pad, a cruel smirk twisting across his lips. But if he doesn't clear it soon, he'll be spending the rest of his life in debt. The part of town in which Xin Yi held his base of operations was one of the oldest districts in the city, and long ago had been nicknamed City of Stone, due its foundations being made of stone. As newer and more modern districts were built, it developed a reputation as a place of evil, and with hundreds of buildings and a thriving colony of residents, it boasted the highest population density in the world. Abandoned by the government, it had become a haven for crime, a forgotten city, alien to authority. The people who lived there were those the world had forgotten. They each had their own place, their own values and their own way of living. Besides the residential buildings, there were hospitals, kindergartens, temples, parks, churches, barbers, meat processing plants and cafeterias, to name a few. Then of course there was the organized crime, which had flourished into a culture of its own. It was this that had given the city its new name. A city of darkness. Those who lived outside its streets knew only one thing for certain. There were only two types of people in the city. Predators and prey. In an apartment block near the outskirts of the city, a doorbell rang. "I'll get it," warbled Mew, hopping over her littlest sister to reach the door. On the other side were two people, one male and one female. The man had white hair, was in his early 20s, and was wearing a vaguely clerical trench coat. The girl was a very familiar nun. "Asia. What are you doing here?" "You-san," blinked Asia, looking suddenly uncertain. We. Dina waddled into the room, having sensed the aura of death and murder, and assumed it was Issei. "Wah," she cheered, latching onto Fried's leg. "You have pretty hair." "Hello miss," smiled Fried, ignoring the affectionate toddler. "You can call me Fried." Fui-pon. "I retract my previous statement. I would like you to call me Fui-pon." "Okay." Mew gave them a once-over. The priest gave her bad vibes, but if he was with Asia, then he couldn't be that bad. "Why don't you come in and tell us what you want?" They stepped into the dark apartment. Asia was hunched nervously, having assumed they were going to punish a wicked devil summoner. Fried was limping, as Hina was still attached to his leg. "Oh, it's Asia," said Sora brightly, briefly greeting the nun before skipping into the kitchen. "I'll make some tea." Sagawa walked in from the bathroom, a flyer marked with a magic circle sticking conspicuously out of one pocket. "Oh, you're the nun with healing powers, Asia, right? How are you?" Asia glanced worriedly at Fried, but he had been shanghaied into playing DTR with Hina. Well, she suddenly remembered their grimy mutual acquaintance. "You're a friend of Issei-san, right? How is he?" An odd shadow passed over Sagawa's face. "Well, you know Issei." Meanwhile, a few blocks away. Issei's fist crashed into the other man's face, sending him spinning into the wire fence. He ignored the crowd's cheers and remained battle-ready, but his opponent didn't get up. "Right," he nodded to himself. 8 wins, with 3,000 per round. I should be able to make enough. "When in doubt," said Judas dryly. "Cage fight." Amazing. Screamed the commentator excitedly. "The contestant has won 8 times in a row. He will now face our undefeated champion, Av." The night air was filled by excited cheers, the audience rendered faceless by the backlighting of the street lamps. As the defeated fist fighter was dragged from the arena, a familiar giant strode into the ring. "Your life," rumbled Av, his muscles poised to crush, "is already over." At the front of the crowd, Shin Yi's sister stood watching. "Issei Haidu, huh?" she murmured thoughtfully. "I'll be watching you. How would you like to die?" snarled Av, his eyes bloodshot behind his mask. "Speak." "What a ham," snorted Judas. "Say something hilarious, like. Look," repeated Issei placatingly. "I think we already agreed last night was my fault for sending mixed messages." The arena went quiet. If there was a cricket, any noise it made would have ended with a horrified question mark. But the roar, Avenue lunged forward. Far faster than he'd anticipated, Issei was thrown back by the huge left fist striking him in the middle. Av slightly exceeded him in physical strength, and though Issei far outmatched him in skill, he was still much better than his appearance would suggest. "This may even be a challenge." "The match has begun," roared the announcer. "There has never been anyone that could walk away from Av's punches. Will the legend be broken? You'll soon find out. I shall grant you death with one punch," thundered Av, bringing his right hand swinging from the side in what would have been a slap if he wasn't holding a fist. Issei braced his left arm and shoulder in a block, the force of the blow almost sending him skidding. He continued to weather the ridiculously fast and strong punches, focusing on redirecting the force rather than simply withstanding them. It soon became clear that the bigger man's skill came from experience rather than actual martial arts training, if only from the numerous openings he could see in his defenses. However, Issei had long developed a habit of not trusting any openings he didn't create himself. He allowed his guard to drift lower and lower as the punches continued, exposing his head and luring Av into a crushing overhead swing. Lifting his arms to block his forearms together like a shield, fists upward and elbows downward, his abdomen was left wide open. Av lunged at the opportunity with his left knee, only for his thigh to be crushed between Issei's right knee and elbow. The piercing effect this trap produced was akin to the claw of a crab, and the only reason Issei didn't tear his leg straight off was because Av managed to straighten his leg at the last moment, an attack of pure instinct, aimed just below the hobo's ribs. Issei allowed his attacking leg to drop. As soon as his right foot hit the ground, Issei used it to jump, drawing his knees to his and hopping straight over Av's kick. Throwing his hands down below, Issei balanced on the outstretched leg for the barest instant before lashing out with both feet, double kicking the bigger man full in the. He could have pulled on the leg to worsen the blow, but for fear of Av catching him in his monstrous grip, he instead used the attack to push off acrobatically, making some room between them after the intense exchange. He survived Av's fists and still fought back. Observed Jackie Chan, who passed through occasionally in the secret hope that he could meet the legendary Tornado and challenge him to a fight. "This guy's not bad. Finally a decent fight," said a buck-toothed man standing next to him. The girl's voice began to echo through the arena, chanting Issei's name enthusiastically. One by one the crowd joined in, until a full third of the audience had followed Shin Yi's sister's lead. "Ignore her," said Judas, sounding oddly contemptuous. "She's flat as a board, her hair is short and dyed, and I can't look at her underwear cause she's wearing jeans. Just finish this joker so I can upskirt someone." Distracted by the remark, it was only his finely tuned instincts that saved Issei from having a tooth knocked out by Av's fist. He leaned back impossibly far, grabbing the attacking hand and using his weight to drag its owner forward. His momentum acting against him, Av was yanked over the filthy fighter with no method of defense. Planting his left foot firmly on the ground, Issei thrust his right leg upward like a spear, allowing his legs to form a straight line from one foot to the other. The idea was to plant himself in the ground, giving him the immovability of a tree as the opponent impaled himself on his extended leg. Unfortunately, Issei wasn't the only one with hair-trigger instincts. At the last moment Av was able to roll off his foot, landing in a crouch and sending a sweeping kick towards the planted leg. His torso still horizontal, Issei was able to place his hands on the outstretched leg and lift himself over the attack. His exquisite balance reduced the burden on Av's leg, making it stable enough for him to lightly flip away to safety. A lot like Boss, Av was built for power and durability. Admittedly, he was nowhere near as skilled, but there had been extenuating reasons as to why Issei had beaten Boss so easily. For starters, there had been the enormous drop, which was absent from the current street fight. Then there was the fact that Boss was airborne when Issei outed him, as opposed to Av, who stuck with admirable stubbornness to his advantageous footing. Finally was the fact that Issei had won the match with his best move, which he really didn't want to use in some random street brawl. The standoff continued as the two fighters evaluated each other, considering possible attacks, counterattacks and counters to the counterattacks. The sad fact was that Av was just too damn good for Issei to win whilst holding back. If this was going to end favorably, he'd have to actually exert some effort. As Issei clenched his fist, a whirlwind of blue kai formed around his right arm, visible to a select few and symbolizing a controlled eruption of internal energy. Av likewise upped the ante, his kai an angry orange as it rolled off his shoulders in waves. The adversaries eyed each other for a moment more before lunging forward with their fists cocked back to time. The combatants screeched to a halt. "Seriously?" shouted Judas angrily. "It was just getting good. But the match is a tie," shouted the announcer as the crowd gradually began to applaud. "Please, give them their prize money." "Cock block. I'll get you next time," snarled Av as they each accepted a paper bag full of money. "I sweared." Yeah. Back in Sagawa's apartment. And then Issei was like, "Shoryuken." Miu jumped to her feet, punching her fist for emphasis. "And no animal ever tried to escape that zoo again." "Wow." Gasped Asia, eyes shimmering as she believed everything they told her. "Really? Would I lie to you?" Miu grinned untruthfully. Sora rolled her eyes in her background. The three of them were sitting around the dining table as they chatted, and the sisters had been so friendly that Asia had actually forgotten what she came for. While this had been going on, Sagawa, Fried and Hina had continued to play DDR and had just danced to Hair Yukai to the tune of Everybody Dance Now by Bob Sinclar. They were now slumped in a heap on the sofa, having thoroughly enjoyed themselves. Unfortunately, the holy duo had arrived there with a purpose. As Sagawa announced he was making dinner and all his nieces tried to help at once, Fried quietly beckoned his partner off to the side. "Father Fried," she whispered hesitantly. "What do we do? They're such nice people." The albino exorcist glanced over his shoulder. Sagawa was wearing a frilly blue apron and was standing over his kitchen work surface, the very picture of a house husband. Miu and Sora stood on his left and right respectively, while Hina tugged on his trouser leg. All four had their backs to him. "Go outside and set up the barrier," he said finally. "I'll handle things here." She gave him a worried look as she inched towards the door. "You won't?" "Don't worry," he smiled gently. "I won't hurt them." He gave one last reassuring nod as the door closed behind her. For a moment he remained where he was until he felt the barrier surround the building. He drew his gun and turned around, fully intending to slaughter the entire family. There were only two types of people in this city: predators and prey. Except that wasn't true. Lights flashed over Fried's vision as something solid and metallic hit him in the face. He was too surprised to properly brace himself and staggered clumsily into the wall. He held his gun out threateningly as he willed the concussion away, fumbling for his sword as he did so. Gradually, his vision began to clear. In front of him stood Sora, her hands on her hips. A set of intimidating brass knuckles decorated each hand and he realized she had punched him with them. "You know," she smiled angelically. "Asia is a nice girl. A very nice girl. She wouldn't hurt a fly. People as pure and honest and kind as her should be nurtured like flowers." She narrowed her eyes as Fried manifested his light sword but didn't back down. "But you're different. Ever since you walked in you've been planning to hurt my family. Even when you were playing with Hina I could see it in your eyes." Her scowl deepened. "Monster." Ma, grinned Fried, mustering his composure. "You can't act like you're not at fault here. You made a deal with the devil, not me." Sora frowned at the remark. "Are you talking about Issei?" Fried blinked. "Issei? Did Asia tell you about him?" "Asia knows Issei." Sora's fingers curled around her knuckles. Though this wasn't the first time her family had been targeted by sleazy hitmen, it was the first not to come hobo hunting, so to speak. "How do you know Issei?" "It doesn't matter." Fried shrugged. He raised his gun until it was pointing straight at her. "This is between you and us. He has nothing to do with it." A deranged grin began to creep across his face. His breathing turned ragged and his tongue traced his damp sheen across his chin. "I'm going to kill you, then defile your corpse." Sora just sighed, shaking her head in disappointment. "That's a shame." He paused. "Why?" "Because those who threaten my family must die." Fried threw himself forward, barely dodging as a knife sailed through the space his head once occupied and embedded with a thud into the wall, continuing the motion to avoid the petite foot that swung down in a devastating axe kick. It would have seriously damaged his back if it hadn't carved through the floorboards instead. "You," said Sora hotly. "I thought we agreed that I'd do the intimidating monologue this time." "Adaver do you mean?" Sestra smirked Miu, having suddenly developed a Russian accent. "There will be no mercy for Ziesos that threatens my family." A set of military-grade combat knives hung casually from her hands. Her petite stature made them look like short swords. "Well," said Fried brightly. He dragged himself to his feet, weapons in hand and as cheerful as ever. "Issei's taught you self-defense then?" Some of Fried's blood had gotten onto Sora's brass knuckles. Absently, she wiped them on her skirt. "You could say that." The deranged exorcist hefted his weapons, his grin growing nastier by the second. "I'm going to enjoy this." Buy villains you like tuna and serve you to cat. As if on some kind of signal, both sisters charged forward. Fried swung his sword, opening fire as he did so. Mew's knives deflected the bullets at lightning speed, even as his light sword shattered against Mew's knuckles. In the city of darkness, everyone is a predator. Everyone. At the edge of vision, the sole armchair of the household began to morph in a transformation sequence that would have sent Optimus Prime into a jealous rage. By the time it came to Fried's attention, it had become an eye-catching mounted turret, the barrel of which was pointed straight at him. A familiar face sat in the operator's seat. "Say huo to ma Whittlefwyand." She cried and squeezed the trigger. Everyone. As the sounds of gunfire erupted behind him, Sagawa serenely lifted the ladle to his lips and sipped experimentally. Just another day. Meanwhile, Issei looked skywards curiously. Huh. That's odd. What is? I have the weirdest feeling that I'm missing out on something, but I don't know what. Actually, I've had the same feeling for a while now. It's incredibly disconcerting. Maybe Sagawa's being attacked by assassins again. Wondered Issei. Well, his nieces are with him. Unlike me, they actually have talent, so even if 30 thugs come after him, he should be fine. Yeah, they hold on. What do you mean by unlike me? You. Why are you talking to yourself? Issei glanced to the side blandly. There, with about 10 goons backing him up, was Shin-Yi. Huh. Oh, it's you people. Shin-Yi twitched in mild annoyance. What kind of reaction is that? His covered face hiding his emotions, Issei fished inside his coat for his winnings and threw them over. Here's the money I owe you. Now we're square. Pretty impressive that you managed to make so much so quickly. Remarked the loan shark, briefly removing the money to count it. Very well, I consider this debt to be cleared. He resealed the bag and casually tossed it over his shoulder, where it was caught by a man with slicked hair. But I'll settle the debt you owe for fighting in my territory right now. Bastard. Issei calmly drew back his right foot, turned his body slightly sideways, and kept his left foot pointing forward. Just take the money. There's more than enough to account for your men. Solve this with money. Laughed Shin-Yi. Stop wasting my time and pay up. 2 bodies hit the floor. 2 hours earlier. I'm rich. Cheered Shin-Yi, flinging his hands into the air. Did you see what he did to our men? The medical fees alone are a couple $100,000. His sister crossed her legs under herself and allowed her bubblegum to pop. She was sitting behind him, perched atop the only table Issei had left standing. You realize he's homeless, right? He can't possibly have the money to pay you. That's what I'm counting on. His grin was narrow and fox-like. I saw the lines of the body underneath. His looks could last him 5, maybe 6 years attracting ladies of all ages. By then he would have paid his dues and then some. Truly, a lucky star shines on me today. A lucky star? She repeated dryly, more because it brought to mind the anime than anything else. Of course. Laughed the older man. By that I mean whoever stole Sagawa's money and forced Issei Haidu to step up. If I knew who they were, I'd reward them. One of the injured men, one of the first that Issei had punched out, heaved himself to his feet. To be honest, he said sheepishly, his ingratiating manner ruined by the blood on his clothes. The ones who took Sagawa's money were me and Ryaiji. He laughed, in a what can you do kind of way. Oh? Shin-Yi cocked his head. He knew the mook was telling the truth, because if he was lying for the reward he wouldn't have brought up his friend. In that case. Present. Issei stared blankly at the beaten, unconscious carcasses. Shin-Yi's men had dragged them from the back of the group and thrown them to the pavement in front of him. I don't. I already investigated and found my group at fault. Said Shin-Yi casually. They have both been beaten and expelled. Are you happy? So he was serious. Murmured Judas curiously. I'm impressed. I'll use Sagawa's money to fix the casino. Now we're square. He continued, his smile easygoing as Issei relaxed his posture. Okay then. Now that that's over with, let's talk business. Business? Frowned Issei. The loan shark stepped up and began to murmur in his ear. How would you be interested in? Issei's eyes shot wide. You want me to what? So shocked was he that he didn't react in time before the blonde's hand found his ass. So firm. Nodded Shin-Yi approvingly, even as the hobo yelped and hopped away. I guarantee you'll be the main attraction. You man whore you. I think I should be going now. Said Issei hurriedly, as Judas began a steady stream of jibes aimed at his duality. Wait. A laminated white business card was pushed into Issei's hand. Consider it. Contact me anytime. You can work full-time or part-time, just remember to call me. The hobo stared flatly as the group walked away. Judas. Yeah? Did you know that Shin-Yi means trustworthy? Most people would have ignored their subordinates' wrongdoings. Acknowledge the spirit. He's a good man. With a sigh, Issei turned to leave. He barely stopped himself before crashing into Shin-Yi's sister. Hi. She said brightly. We finally meet. Issei turned on his heel and started walking. Saga was going to be pleased. Definitely. It almost trumps the time you saved Hina from boss. Hey. Don't ignore me. Issei lazily glanced over his shoulder before breaking into a run. What the hey? Get back here. Meanwhile. Hold on. Time out. Time out. Fried was still in Sagawa's apartment. Light was pouring out the barrel of his gun into the shape of a shield, which he was currently hiding behind. Timeouts are for pussies. Shouted Sora, ruthlessly punching his shield. Her brass knuckles protected her from the light's burn, and her blows packed enough force to keep him on his knees. Because Sagawa had begun to complain about the noise, Hina had abandoned her turret in favor of sitting next to her middle sister on the kitchen counter and was now enthusiastically egging her on. Mew, on the other hand, was proving she was as efficient at throwing knives as she was at stabbing with them. As he desperately deflected a fresh volley with his light sword, Fried wondered if the Sagawa family knife drawer was truly infinite. Who wants barbecue sauce? Came a voice from the kitchen. I do. Called all three sisters at once. Taking advantage of their distraction, Fried rolled away and turned of his light sword. Flipping it into a reverse grip, he pressed a hidden button on the hilt. At the abandoned church. Eyes. Shouted Middled, crashing into the personal lounge of the fallen angels. The emergency alarm just went off. Creiger, who had been reclining on the sofa with a magazine, bolted upright. Who set it off? Fried. Fried. This was from Denasiage, who was sitting in a ratty-looking armchair with a coffee in one hand and a newspaper in the other. Wasn't he taking care of that devil summoner? Asia was with him. Said Kalawana seriously, having just entered the room behind Middled. And Asia is friends with Haidu. Everyone looked at Creiger, who had turned bright pink. At everyone combat ready. She snarled in a futile attempt to pass off the blush as anger. This means war. And when he wins, said Middled quietly. Maybe he'll molest us again. Back with the action. Sagawa and his girls were crouched behind the kitchen counter, which was weathering surprisingly well under the hail of bullets. Actual bullets, because Fried had found one of Hina's assault rifles under the bathtub. Of course, sighed Mew, who had reverted back to a Japanese accent now she'd calmed down. You realize the landlord is probably watching all of this on those secret cameras of his. Perverted Lolikin Shitston. Scowled Sora. There was a brief pause. Hina, never repeat any of the words I just said. Like Wokin. Lolikin. Sora corrected. The hail of bullets stopped briefly as a grenade sailed over the counter. Fuck off cocker. Shouted Sora, grabbing the bomb out of the air and throwing it back where it came for. A few moments after it detonated, the sounds of gunfire started up again. Don't say any of those words either. Like fuck. 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 He's completely destroyed dinner. Said Sagawa dryly, looking at the food scattered across the floor. He wasn't so worried about the food itself, because he knew the landlord would enjoy the current firefight so much he'd likely treat them to pizza later. He'd preferred that pot without bullet holes, however. Don't worry, said Mew. There are no spare mags for that gun. As soon as he runs out of bullets I'll stab him and dump his corpse out the window. Thank you. Fucka. Fucka. Close enough. Sora paused, cocking her head curiously. Hey, the shooting stow. With a crazed scream, Fried launched himself sword first over the counter. It would have been a lot more successful if Sagawa's hand hadn't brushed up against the flyer in his pocket. Ku Academy. Hineko sat on the sofa, twiddling her thumbs. She had kept herself available for the entire evening for the sake of the new devil summoner. There were so many things they could wish for that newbies often wanted to explore their options before settling the deal. He was taking his sweet time, however, and things had become very boring now that she'd run out of snacks. The summoning circle lit up, her face with it. Finally. With a spring in her step, she ran into the light and disappeared. Back at ground zero. Hineko shot out of the flyer at running speeds, hurtling through the air and slamming head first into Fried's gut. The exorcist was blown backwards, crashed awkwardly into the ceiling and fell bonelessly onto the TV. The girl bounced back from the impact, finding herself sprawled across their collective laps. Anya, she mumbled cutely, clutching at her throbbing forehead. How the hell did she get here? Wondered Sora. Fucka. Fucka. Cheered Hina, who had decided this was her new favorite word. Excuse me? Said Sagawa uncertainly. He would have qualified for the title of only sane man if he hadn't been so utterly inured to this sort of thing in the year since he had met Issei. Are you alright? I'll live. Winced Kaneko, slowly pulling herself into a sitting position. Mew spotted the flyer and picked it up curiously. Did you come out of this? Summoning circle. Said Kaneko. I'm a devil. I'm here to grant your wish. Considering she had literally appeared out of nowhere, they were rather inclined to believe her. Does that mean you'll take our souls? Asked Sora. Depends. Said Kaneko, who was no longer holding her head. What do you wish for? The eldest girl cocked her head at the question. What would it take for you to get rid of that priest for us? Hey! Shouted Fried, rising unsteadily to his feet. Where's the psychotic loli that just punched me? Kaneko's eyebrows furrowed in silent fury. Him, I'll kill for free. She hopped over the counter and lunged. The panini says the girl wins. Said Mew. No bet. Grunted Sagawa, for whom all the young girls in his life were trained killing machines. Fucka. Fucka. Hina. I told you that's a bad word. At Ku Academy. Murmured Kiba, having just warped back from a client. Has Kaneko-chan finally left? Yep. Nodded Akeno, too distracted to reply properly. She and Rias were carefully examining the summoning circle, their faces contorted with worry. Something wrong? We've lost contact with Kaneko. Said Rias shortly, not looking up from the array she was checking over. As soon as she reached the summoner she dropped off the grid. The knight felt his blood freeze. She's not. She's alive. Said Akeno, her abrupt tone telling the other two that she had only just discovered what was wrong. She's inside a barrier of fallen angel origin. It remains on standby until a devil walks into it, then traps them inside. It activated before we could get a read on the summoner's residence, but we can tell from the residual energies when it blocks us that it needs to be constantly upheld by a spellcaster. While an exorcist remains inside to fight the devil. Nodded Rias. And if the exorcist is around the same level as the spellcaster, then. Akeno met her eyes. Kaneko will kick their ass. The Sagawa residence. Fried had abandoned his pilfered firearms and switched back to his light weapons. Though in theory they should have given him the advantage against a devil, the rook attribute was simply proving too strong for his low-grade weapons. Kaneko was simply ignoring the hail of bullets, allowing them to bounce off her skin as she chased him about the room. This did not mean she was just charging recklessly, however. Kaneko was skilled in several martial arts and was using unpredictable footwork not to avoid his attack, but rather to throw off his perception of where the next blow would come from. Fried lashed out with a horizontal swing as she drew too close, only for her to duck underneath it and lunge at his lower body. Assuming she was trying to smash his legs or disrupt his footing, Fried leapt over the punch, flipping in midair in order to land feet first against the ceiling. With a mad scream, he pushed off sword first. The punch had been a feint. Drawing back her extended fist, Kaneko used her momentum to brace herself against the floor before springing upwards in a rising uppercut. The sword of light shattered for the umpteenth time that night as it struck her fist, which continued its arc in order to embed itself in Fried's gut. For a moment they hung in midair, the exorcist impaled on the devil's fist, before he was blown backwards and flattened against the ceiling. The fact that he neither exploded nor burst straight through was due entirely to Asia's barrier. After a few moments he drifted back to the attention of physics and flopped to the ground, the room silent except for his pained grunt. He looked up and Kaneko tensed. Rather than his usual manic grin, his lips were curled in a cold smirk. Gotcha. Her eyes widening, Kaneko frantically turned and sprinted towards the unsuspecting humans. Outside. Open fire. Said Reiner, the command delivered at the exact moment Asia dropped the barrier. Though shorter than most of its neighbors, the apartment block was double the size of the convenience store her goons were standing on. Sagawa and his nieces, on the other hand, were perfectly level with them. This meant that when the various assault rifles, sniper rifles, miniguns and so on began to fire a wall of bullets at the building's side, they almost assuredly tore the devil summoner and his family to shreds. Since all their firearms had been modded in order to shoot light bullets, which also meant they were nearly soundless, the devil they had sensed would likewise follow them into hell. Reiner herself was standing way behind the line of fire, wearing that peculiar bondage outfit she had taken to wearing in a futile attempt to catch Azazel's attention. Denasiage and Kalwana, as her right and left hands respectively, stood at her sides. Middle stood a short distance behind her with the healing maiden, having warped her away just as the attack started. Asia had her hands over her mouth, shocked by the callous violence. She had probably never truly realized what killing a devil summoner meant. Oh well. We all grow up sometime. The wall they were shooting at had by now been completely destroyed, though she couldn't see what was beyond it due to the retina-frying light show coming from their supernatural weapons. With a shouted order, the miniguns began to focus their fire on the corners closest to them. Within seconds the supports had crumbled, slowly, deliciously, it started to topple. Straight towards them. Oh crap. The tallest of the exorcists stepped forward. His huge muscular frame towered head and shoulders over his comrades, while his eyes were trained on the collapsing structure. He was wearing a custom-made power suit, a form-fitting affair that enhanced his physical abilities tremendously. The black bodysuit with white stripes was highlighted by enormous metal rings around his wrists, collar and ankles. A shock of black hair erupted from a steel mask covering the upper part of his face, a single slit available for his eyes. Unhurriedly, he stretched his arm to the side. With a sound like iron nails being dragged over a chalkboard, his hand distorted, flowing like liquid metal into the form of a blade. With a flick of his wrist it screamed through the air, extending with whip-like flexibility and slicing the entire apartment block in half with one blow. As the two halves crashed to either side of their perch, he turned and glowered through his mask. That, he declared coldly, was beyond stupid. There was some awkward shifting. Even Reiner was too embarrassed to look him in the eye. As the dust cleared, the inhabitants of the Devil Summoner's apartment stood level with them atop the decapitated building. Fried had avoided the worst of the onslaught by lying on the ground, while Kaneko has protected the humans with a small, spherical barrier, reinforced with the power of the rook. The shield held for a moment more before she let it fall. Excessive. Well, you know what they say. Chirruped Fried, hopping lightly to his feet. There ain't no kill like overkill. I'll keep that in mind. Growled the little devil, balling her fists and adopting a fighting stance. She remained protectively in front of the four humans. Is this it? Frowned Issei. One devil. Fried, are you losing your touch? I didn't call you because of her. Grunted the exorcist, taking care not to turn his back on the targets. I called you because of. He called you because of us, fuckers. Shouted Sora, suddenly appearing to Kaneko's right. As the devil glanced at her in surprise, Mew stepped forward on her other side, an enormous pair of meat cleavers in her hands. Behind them, Hina reached into the floorboards and pulled out a firearm as big as she was. We'll show you how well Issei taught us. You know Issei-sama. Blurted Reiner. There was a shocked silence. A look of abject mortification crept over the fallen angel's face as everyone present turned to stare at her. What? Said Sora blankly. Reiner-sama. Blinked Asia curiously. How do you know Issei-san? As the dark woman reddened, Middle piped up. Let's just say, she grinned wickedly. He has magic fingers. At that moment, 3 magic circles bearing the crest of Grimory warped into existence behind Team Sagawa, prompting the sudden appearance of Rias, Akeno and Kiba. Kaneko, are you alright? Or devils? Hissed Kalawana, and the assembled forces tensed up. It doubtless would have dissolved into an all-out brawl, if not for what came next. But you, murmured Kaneko. These people know your boyfriend. They know Issei. Blinked Rias, then blushed heartily. He's not my boyfriend. What the fuck is your relationship with Issei-sama? Snarled Reiner, sounding weirdly pissed off. The Redeed was totally thrown by the question. Issei-sama. Ignores Imanda Vashka, comrade. She is not Uchidel's type. Boo. Issei. Oh. I know Issei too. Shouted Fried excitedly, flinging his hands in the air. Weepon an itch, yeah. I'm very confused right now. Said Kiba quietly, but whichever of the multitude of things he could have been confused by was drowned out by Hina's excited reiterations of fucka. Fucka. Everybody shut up. Shouted Reiner, almost purple with embarrassment and rage. Shut up. All of you, just shut up. I don't care who you are, and I don't care how you know that ridiculous hobo. We're here to kill you, kill all of you. And there's not a damn thing you mongrels can do about it. I shall see, Shliushka. Kiba and the nieces readied their weapons and adopted fighting stances, as did Kaneko. The air around Rias and Akeno began to swirl with demonic energy, while the fallen angels and their cohorts likewise prepared for battle. Only one person ignored the rising tension. Oh look. Said Fried brightly. It's Issei. For the gathered combatants, there was something ethereal in the way the ragged man stood there. His filthy clothes fluttered in the slight wind, and his eyes burned over them as each soul present was regarded in turn. From Issei's point of view, on the other hand, it was pure bull. He had just climbed the stairs to Sagawa's floor, only to find that it was now the roof. He looked at Sora and Mew, fully armed, standing with a small silver-haired girl he'd never met before. On the floor behind them were Sagawa and Hina, who was holding the gun he'd taken from that dude at Ria's school. Rias herself was also there, as was Akeno and a skinny blonde kid. He was probably the playboy that he'd heard Ria's fans say was in her club, which meant the unknown girl was probably the school mascot. On a nearby rooftop was a bunch of cosplayers that he ignored by default, and off by himself stood an annoying person he hadn't met in years. He folded his arms. Alright, he said threateningly. Who started it? Reiner felt her loins twitch treacherously. I did. Shouted Fried, waving one hand over his head. There was a blur, and suddenly Issei was right there punching him in the face. Fried, you jackass. Shouted Issei angrily, shaking him furiously by the lapels. What the hell kind of shit have you gotten yourself in this time? If he says they were having an orgy and just didn't want to invite you, I'm going to be very upset. We were having an orgy and just didn't want to invite you. Wow. This guy's on the ball. That is not a completely unbelievable answer. Said Issei finally. He was looking at Reiner as he said this. Do not be fooled, Uchidel. Shouted Mew. Vi would never sink to Zur level. Mew. Said Issei gently. Accent. Oops. Sorry. That's fine. Issei, said Sagawa, who was taking this far better than anyone else present due to his incredible go with the flow powers. That man next to you tried to kill my family a few minutes ago. Issei's shoulders slumped in resignation. Yeah, I thought he probably would have. Aren't you going to introduce us? His nieces looked at him in disbelief, but he ignored them. I suppose. Sighed Issei. This here is Fried Zelsen. He grunted, slapping the slightly smaller man on the shoulder. And he's my little brother. The silence was glorious. Bullshit. Shouted Reiner, her brain finally catching up with what was going on. There's no fucking way that you. Did I say you could talk? Said Issei sharply. What? Blinked Reiner, taken aback. No, Did I open my mouth and say you could talk? No. Then stay there and be quiet. Yes, Issei-sama. But girl. He nodded and her face burned red. He turned to face the people he actually liked and scratched his head. Look, I've had a long day, so I'm going to deal with you people one by one starting with you. He turned on Fried, poking one finger into his face. No. Fried blinked. What? But I. No. But. No. Okay. Dragging his feet, Fried slumped away. I'll just go home then. What? Blurted Kalawana. You mean you're just going to walk away? He said no. There was a brief flash of light and he was gone. Alright. Nodded Issei, clapping his hands. Now you Sagawa. He turned to his least violent friend, his eyes immediately narrowing. What the hell? Seriously, what the fucking hell? Forget magnets and iron, you attract trouble like a planet attracts fucking everything. I'm afraid you know as much as I do. Sighed Sagawa, who had been asking himself all the questions Issei had just asked all night. They just suddenly turned up and started shooting things. Issei raised his eyes towards Ria's. Don't look at me. She stammered. We were just summoned to deal with the fallen angels. Though the word summoned made him want to ask more, Issei turned on the exorcists. We're here because we heard there was a devil summoner. Said Reiner. Even if we're not in direct contact with God anymore we still have a responsibility. Issei turned back to Sagawa. You mean this thing? Said the civilian, holding up the flyer. I found it on a bench and put it in my pocket. On a bench? Frowned Rias. But those should only be given to people we choose specifically. So Sagawa-sen isn't a devil summoner? Asked Asia hopefully. She looked immensely relieved. Issei angrily snatched the flyer from Sagawa's hands and, more gently, the firearm from Hina's. He then threw the scrap of paper into the air and shot it apart with pinpoint accuracy, shocking the onlookers with a sudden noise and violence. You, he growled, after tossing the empty pistol to the ground below. When you were reading the Twilight books, I remember you say the male lead bought his girlfriend a nuke-proof car. Oh yeah? Can you remember what it was called? Are you going to get us a car? No. I'm going to find out what it's made out of, turn it into a cage and lock you inside. It's the only solution. This seemed to be all Issei had to say on the matter, because here he turned back to Rias. For a moment they simply looked at one another. So devils. Since he had already figured out the language thing in their first meeting, this wasn't nearly so hard to admit. That's right, yeah. And devils are completely different to fallen angels. Yep. And have nothing better to do with their time than attend a human high school. Okay, I can buy that. Something about his posture seemed to relax. So how have you been? Pretty good. The guidance counselor's been lashing out at everything around him since your last visit. It's 'cause I threatened his masculinity. Grunted Issei. By the way, that necklace looks really good on you. Rias turned pink, but kept her composure. Thanks. You'll never guess where I got it. Try me. Hey. Shouted Sora indignantly. Are you seriously just going to stand there and flirt? Oh right. Blinked Issei. These girls are my disciples. The loud one is Sora, the blonde is Mew, and the little one is Hina. The dude is their Uncle Sagawa. Guys, this is Rias. Wah. Squealed Hina, running over to hug the Retide's ankles. Ricken. One look at the giggling bundle of Mo and Rias melted. Hi Akeno. Nodded Issei as the two started to cuddle. Hi. Beamed Akeno, who thought the current standoff was hilarious. We just keep bumping into each other, don't we? Seems that way. Acknowledged Issei. I take it these are the two members of your club that I haven't met yet. How do you do? Smiled the pretty boy with the sword. My name is Yudo Kiba. Kaneko Taoju. Issei. Nodded Issei. Judas. Said Judas, but of course only Issei could hear him. Issei, how should I put this? Kiba rubbed the back of his head awkwardly for a moment before bowing formally. My master may be a handful at times, but please take care of her. There was an expectant pause before everyone looked at Rias. Ricken has such pretty hair. Cooed Hina, who was snuggling into Rias. Thank you. Smiled Rias, who had already been brainwashed by the adorable. Your hair is pretty too. What? Pouted Akeno. No Tsukomi. Disappointing. Well, at any rate, grunted Issei, stumping past the cuddling girls. You. He shouted dramatically, pointing at Reiner's crew and causing them all to flinch away reflexively. There was an odd pause. Aren't you that stalker who tried to kill me the other day? The scantily clad stalker froze in place. Aye, that was Issei-sama. Why do you call him that? Wondered Kiba curiously. 'Cause she's smart. Grunted Issei. Tell them the real reason. Please. Issei sighed. People pick fights with me. Lots of people. And I'm not always in the mood. So when someone feels like fighting me and I don't feel the same way, I tend to find an alternate solution. Such as? Asked Akeno, who just knew the answer would make her laugh. Pressure points. Admitted Issei. Generally located on the causing incredible pleasure, debilitating euphoria and crippling joint weakness. Tsuo, frowned Sora. You're saying you groped her into insensate orgasmic delirium. Is that what you're trying to tell us? Well, it sounds a lot worse than it is when you put it like that. The worst? You ha 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 ha. And besides, it's not like those pressure points are only on women. Every single exorcist took an intimidated step back. This is ridiculous. Shouted Kalawana angrily. Why are we all just standing here? Just because he knows a few non-linear erogenous zones doesn't mean that, and with a gust of wind, she disappeared. Rias, cover Hina's eyes. Said Issei grimly. Every head swiveled to face him, and all were shocked to see the buxom fallen angel had suddenly appeared in his arms. Murmured the devil, finally looking up from the 3-year-old on her lap. What? Han. Ed Kalawana, knees nearly buckling as the hobo began his ministrations. Whoa. Shouted Rias, frantically trying to cover Hina's eyes and ears at the same time. Whoa. What the? Why you, bastard? Stammered Kalawana, her bravado wasted by the fact that Issei's was the only thing keeping her upright. Why you len never get away with this? I'll believe that when your friends come to help you. Said Issei unsympathetically, earning a particularly why after tweaking her left odd. The homeless man is right. Said Denasiage, though he really didn't want to admit it. Shouldn't we be helping? Reiner was staring unblinkingly at the display, chewing on one knuckle and cheeks blazing with a luminescent blush. Middlet was brazenly recording what was happening on her phone, while Asia had covered her eyes with her hands, only to peep shyly between her fingers. Even the exorcists were hypnotized by the erotic sight. Never mind. Go Issei. Cheered Judas enthusiastically. Do the redeed next. You know, said Issei thoughtfully, speaking deliberately close to her ear. You're holding up a lot better than your friend did. Shut up. Ed Kalawana, desperately trying to ignore the sensation of his perfectly formed abs against her back. Why you len never, and never be break me. Challenge accepted. He purred back, and she screamed as his tender caresses suddenly intensified. Are you guys as aroused as I am? Asked Akeno, licking her lips saucily as she drank in the sight. You have no idea. Responded 3 voices at once. Kiba and Sagawa looked at each other in surprise, while Mew remained utterly focused on the motions of Issei's hands. Rias had been utterly robbed of words. She could only stare, slack-jawed and cheeks blazing. She had settled for covering Hina's ears with her hands, while burying the girl's face in her, which was actually really comfy, to the point that the 3-year-old had happily fallen asleep. Oh, I get it now. Exclaimed Sora, who had been oddly silent up until this point. You're using additional pressure points to keep her from climaxing. You have a good eye. Nodded Issei, giving Kalawana another tweak. She is completely at my mercy. And no Ed Kalawana. By now her bones felt like they were made from goo. Please let me. Let me think about it. Said Issei calmly. No. Her tortured scream echoed through the night air. Please, she sobbed. I'll do anything. Then beg. Whoa. Deja vu. But I'll ready. You know what I mean. Please forgive me, she rasped finally. Issei-sama. Well okay. He let go of her, then neatly stepped back. Every muscle in the fallen angel's body tensed, keeping her standing for a few precious seconds, until she suddenly convulsed and fell with a scream to the ground. When she finally went limp, Issei cautiously approached and murmured, You okay? Yes, came the hoarse whisper. She was sweating so hard she had begun to steam in the cool air. Thank you, Issei-sama. No problem. Bet one of the other girls. Quickly, while they're distracted. As he usually did, Issei ignored him. Right then, now that that's over with, you guys have 3 options. He held up his right index finger. Option 1. You pick up your friend, careful, she's sticky, and go home. No one gets hurt and or humiliated. No one else, rather. He lifted his middle finger. Option 2. You try to attack me and I kill you in retaliation. I'm dirty enough and I don't need bloodstains on top of everything else, so I strongly urge against this option. He raised his ring finger. And finally, option 3. Basically the same as option 1, except I give anyone who wants one an orgasm before they leave. Immediately, Middle flung one hand into the air. Me first. Me first. Beside her, Reiner's mouth was opening and closing soundlessly. She appeared genuinely conflicted as to whether she should ask for the same thing. Riaz had the same look on her face, for totally different reasons, while Luceno had odd glint in her eye. Not in a someone to tease, yufufufu sort of way, but more of a comrade appears way. Kiba was looking at him with ashamed admiration, while Kaneko was glaring at him, as if he were the worst kind of scum between heaven and earth. Issei's shoulders slumped slightly when he realized he couldn't deny it. No. Middle quickly silenced herself as the deep voice rang out, and all eyes were drawn to the tall figure as he moved to the front of the group of exorcists. It was the same man who had cut the falling building in half earlier, and even with the mask covering his face he seemed distinctly unamused. I refuse. We shall not run, and we shall not lose either. Not here, and not to you. Lachlan. Snapped an Issei, even though he kind of agreed with him. You're overstepping your bounds. You do not have the authority to. Authority? Interrupted the newly named exorcist. That no longer matters. How can we still call ourselves exorcists and angels even fallen as we are if we do not combat the dregs of hell as is our duty? There was a murmur of agreement and the devils cautiously returned to their combat stances. Though we are no longer beholden in the eyes of God, that does not change our mission. We still bear the duty to fight for what is good, to hunt and destroy evil wheresoever we should find it. All of you feel the same way, all of you have devoted your life to fighting the great scourges I have. And we will leave it at this. Are we going to run in fear after a single crass act of intimidation? The murmurs had risen to shouts of indignation as the mob mentality reignited their fighting spirit. I say no. I shall not run. I shall not compromise. We are in the right, and I will not be cowed by a filthy, arrogant, deviant beggar like some. What did you just call me? Issei had not raised his voice, but his words still managed to cut through the air like a knife. Suddenly, the night seemed a whole lot colder. Oh shit. Whoa, time to go. Squeaked Mew, pivoting on one foot and running up to Riaz, who she correctly assumed to be in charge. You wouldn't mind giving us a lift out of here, would you? As in now. Iridid frowned, still very much disoriented. What? Why? They called him. The Mew glanced over her shoulder nervously. The B word. We need to get out of here before things get violent. Of course, we don't expect you to do it for free. Rushed Sagawa, who was likewise starting to panic. We were told by Taoju-san, was that her name? That you have a give and take policy. Rest assured, we're perfectly willing to compensate. What? Snarled Issei. The fuck did you just call me? Sorry to rush you, interrupted Sora. But we need to haul ass right now. Still unsure as to what she should do, Ria's attention was drawn downwards by a tiny hand tugging on her collar. One, Rickon. Said Hina solemnly. Ichishkoi when heshangwi. Okay. Riaz nodded finally. Since humans couldn't be teleported using demonic means, they had to be carried and flown away. Riaz continued to carry Hina, while Luceno carried Sora, Kiba took Mew, and Kaneko took Sagawa, since she was the strongest. As they spread their wings and took to the skies, Riaz couldn't help glancing over her shoulder at the lone hobo. Would he really be okay on his own? I called you a beggar. Snarled Lachlan. A weak, filthy, sinful creation like you has no place on our glorious earth. Boss. Said one of the exorcists plaintively. Do you really think you should be antagonizing? Shut up, Roger. Snapped Lachlan. Weak, am I? Said Issei coldly. Well, how about this then? He knelt down, retrieved a plastic bottle of water that happened to be lying by his foot, then straightened. This weak little beggar is going to take this bottle of water and use it to kill 3 of your friends. How about that? The exorcists now looked extremely nervous. Lachlan, however, was clearly nowhere near as genre savvy as his peers. A bottle of water? He parroted mockingly. A plastic bottle. What exactly do you plan to do with that? With a twitch, Issei crushed the bottle in his hand. The water burst in all directions, but to Issei it may as well have moved in slow motion. As the liquid seemed to hang in the air, he brought the same hand behind the blob of water, with the thumb and middle finger poised ready to flick. In 3 quick flashes of the finger, 3 drops of water were thrown forward at bullet speeds, hitting the 3 exorcists standing closest to Lachlan. Contrary to his earlier boast, Issei hadn't killed them, but since each man had been struck squarely in the forehead, they were easily knocked out cold. Time started up again, the men hit the ground, and the night resounded with incredulous silence. What are you waiting for? Stammered Lachlan. Shoot him. Shoot him now. Dozens of light-powered firearms started up at once, all of them focused on the unarmed tramp. Just like last time, not a single bullet hit him. He just stood there as the bullets blew past. Damn it. What kind of ability does he have? Issei blinked. Ability? DCH. what N00B. There was a flash of light and Reiner appeared at his flank. Trusting in the artillery to keep him occupied, she ducked down and placed her left palm on the comatose Kalawana's shoulder, warping them both back behind the line of fire. She turned to Treachery and beckoned him over. "I'm taking Asia and Kalawana back to the church." She shouted over the gunfire, the nun looking frantic as she worried for Issei's well-being. "They'll be a liability if they stay. You handle things here." "Can we kill him?" Treachery shouted back. He really wanted her to say yes. "I don't know. Can you?" The three disappeared, leaving Treachery, Middleton Lachlan in charge. The barrage gradually eased up as the gunman realized it wasn't doing any good. "He's using a hemispherical barrier that only covers his torso," shouted Lachlan suddenly. "Aim for his legs." "Watch my right foot," ordered Issei flatly, before slamming the appendage into the floor. A long cylindrical metal object burst from the floorboards and was neatly plucked from the air. "Say hello," he grinned, pointing the minigun at his enemy. "To my little friend." The worst part of the weapon was the noise. A deafening furious noise that crushed the soul just to listen to, further crumbling their morale. The first hit taken as they watched their frontmost comrades torn apart by the storm of bullets. The rest of them could only cower behind hastily erected shields of light, though even those were almost crushed by the ridiculously powerful weapon. But the berserker roar, Lachlan leapt directly over his subordinates as one arm liquefied and reformed into a blade. Issei was forced to cease fire and use the gun to block as the heavy man descended, sparks flying as the two weapons clashed. "Where the fuck did that thing come from?" snarled Lachlan, their faces inches apart. "Belongs to the 3-year-old. Grunted Issei, before front-kicking the other man hard in the dot. The exorcist sailed backwards and skidded briefly on his heels, but quickly regained his footing. "He can only block projectiles," shouted Lachlan, attempting reignite the fighting spirit of his troops. "Use the gems." As the Mook exorcists began to fumble in their pockets, Lachlan once more attacked with his sword, keeping Issei pinned as his comrades prepared. The gems he referred to were opaque black precious stones cut into diamond shapes, one each in the possession of an exorcist. As each man withdrew the stone from his pocket, he pressed it into his forehead, a dim gray light emanating from within. Starting around the gems and spreading outwards, their skin began to peel away. There was no blood, and the underside of the discarded skin was a fetid black. Their skulls were as gray as the light flowing from the gems, the jaws fused together to make a featureless expanse. The holes for their ears and noses had likewise disappeared, while each of them now had 6 eyes set into their faces. Sparkling shards of green that seemed out of place on an otherwise bland visage. As their skin and clothes continued to fall away, the form beneath seemed less skeletal and more mechanical, as if the metamorphosis forced by the peculiar devices somehow partially converted their bodies into machines. They were also taller, with huge clawed feet at the ends of legs with reversed knees and jagged blades adorning their forearms. As the first of them lunged toward him, Issei abandoned the gun, whirlwinds of blue kai surrounding his arms as an omnidirectional barrier of punches kept the transformed exorcists back. They were far faster and more agile than any human had any right to be, and the straightforward ferocity of their attacks implied instinct over human intelligence. As Issei began to lash out with his feet as well as his fists, Lachlan retreated, allowing the homeless man to tear into the creatures with ruthless abandon. After breaking numerous attacking limbs and seeing no difference, Issei took a risk, grabbing one foe about the wrist and violently tearing off his entire arm. When the arm immediately grew back, it confirmed his suspicions. The creatures were regenerating. "I don't see why you're finding this so difficult," said Judas. He sounded remarkably blasé. "The gems are giving them power. Destroy the gems and you win." That was actually a damn good idea. Extending his right index finger ramrod straight, Issei plunged it into the nearest exorcist's forehead with the force of a bullet. The creature froze as the jewel shattered, screaming as he yanked the finger free. Foul black smoke spewed from the wound and the quasi-flesh dissolved in grey fire. As the conflagration ended, only a yellowed skeleton remained, shattering as it hit the ground. "Wait. When you kill them, say." Issei smirked as the creatures backed away. He extended his index fingers, met the shocked Lachlan's eyes and said, "Shungoku Satsu." He disappeared. In a series of consecutive impacts so close together they were almost simultaneous, the transformed exorcists were blown back, first the gems and then their flesh burning away to nothing. Before they had even hit the ground, Issei reappeared, his back to the lead exorcist. He glanced over his shoulder at his remaining enemy, his burning blue eyes cold yet satisfied. "Isen Senjeki, Motherfucker." As the last man fell dead and fleshless to the ground, Lachlan began to quiver with suppressed rage. "You bastard," he snarled. "You bastard." The blade attached to his arm dissolved once more into liquid metal, reforming around his right arm into a huge, unwieldy gauntlet. "I'll kill you." He burst forward, the ground ruptured from where he had pushed off. Steam burst from the elbow of his gauntlet, further propelling him forward and increasing the weight of the punch. Issei adopted an odd stance in response. His feet were wide apart and his legs were bent, hands and arms raised level with his face. His arms were horizontal, the fingers pointing upward and the palms facing forward. His right arm was held straight, while his left arm was bent with the palm held closer to his face. As the burly exorcist drew closer, Issei moved his hands in the same way a practitioner of karate would throw a punch. He threw his left palm forward while simultaneously pulling his right arm back. As Issei's palm strike and Lachlan's punch collided, the tramp deliberately allowed his arm to be pushed back. Once again, his right arm extended as his left arm retracted. Controlling his muscles with unworldly precision, Issei allowed the force of the clash to travel down his defending arm, through his, taking care to maneuver the kinetic force away from his heart and back up his attacking arm. As his right palm struck the bigger man in the, it effectively channeled the force not only of Lachlan's own punch, but also two of Issei's own. Lachlan was blown away by the impact, flipping gracelessly through the air to finally dig a crater into the side of the nearby building. For a moment he remained embedded before gravity peeled him away and he collapsed unconscious to the ground below. What the hell was that? Issei glanced at the small blonde fallen angel, who had landed a few feet away from him after Lachlan's defeat. What was what? That thing you just Oh, I see. Middle had a crafty look on her face, like Sagawa when he was about to win a game of Cluedo. You can control kinetic energy. That's your ability. Yeah, no. Sorry, wrong. Then how? Exploded Middle, flinging her hands into the air. How did you beat Lachlan? Issei shrugged. He appeared to have relaxed his guard, but appearances were generally deceiving. I just redirected the force down one arm, then shot it back out the other. That sounds an awful lot like. It's a martial arts technique, alright. She gave him a long flat look. Alright then. How did you knock out those three at the start? That was something I picked up in Korea. It's called the water sphere flick. It's exactly what it sounds like, to be honest. Another flat look. Hey, just because I'm moving too fast for you to see what I'm doing doesn't mean I'm not doing it. Middle's face brightened with realization. Oh, does that mean that earlier you were just dodging the bullets at top speeds? No. He said calmly. I was just redirecting them with my hands. You were. I was slapping them out the way. Middle froze where she stood. You can deflect bullets with your bare hands. Afraid so? That's just ridiculous. Something Issei had noticed was that people tended to deny his skills even after seeing them firsthand. How could a human do that? You must have some ability or bloodline or magic or artifact or sacred gear. What is it with people these days? Sighed Issei, slumping his shoulders. Everyone looking for these stupid shortcuts to power instead of working for it like I did. Always looking for power in the most stupid places, when true power, the only power that matters, is within yourself. Easy there. You're strong, but you're not Saitama. Issei frowned and Middle flinched in response, thinking it was her he was upset with. But seriously now, he sighed, a bit put out by her reaction. Why don't we just go opposite ways and forget this ever happened? No one else gets hurt. Yeah, no. Sighed Middle. A set of steel gray greaves flashed into existence around her legs. They covered every inch of skin to the mid-thigh, more like a set of braces than a set of greaves, and had a set of glowing purple wing-like spurs on each heel. I'm afraid that's just not an option. Team loyalty, you understand. Completely, nodded Issei, as they each subtly adopted fighting stances. So, nothing personal. Nothing personal. She nodded gratefully. There was a brief lull. Far faster than her body type would suggest, Middle swung her right leg in a diagonal heel kick. The purple trail left by the motion separated from her foot in a spinning disc of energy. Unused to fighting the supernatural, Issei's reflexes were a fraction slower than they would have usually been. Though he was able to duck underneath it, he was unable to react in time for the second strike. With unreal speed, the fallen angel vanished and reappeared behind him, knocking him through the air with a devastating kick. Capitalizing on his shock, Middle actually chased him through the air. Her legs blurred in a rapid-fire assault on his body until she suddenly disappeared, reappearing directly in his flight path. Purple lightning started from her spurs and traveled up her legs, wreathing her fists in light. A devastating right hook caused the energy to explode against Issei's, knocking him in the opposite direction. The energy around her left hand formed into purple whip, which wrapped itself around Issei's waist. But the yank Middle hauled him over her head and slammed him into the floor, repeated the motion a second time, and finally pulled him close, launching him skywards with an upwards kick. As the hobo hurtled past the skyline, Middle spread her wings and flew after him, using the suddenly three-dimensional battlefield to strike him with dozens of kicks from every direction. Though she tried to keep it random to disorient him, Issei had experienced such tactics before. Analyzing the inevitable patterns, he anticipated and intercepted her kick by grabbing her around the ankle and pulling. With the fallen angel caught off guard, they both flipped briefly through the air before Issei kicked off, propelling himself upwards while pushing his opponent downwards. By this point they were extremely far above ground, surrounded by skyscrapers. Landing feet first against one such construct, Issei pushed himself off in a straight line towards Middle. A dozen punches were thrown even as he blitzed past, which Middle was too disoriented to dodge. Like a ping-pong ball he bounced off the opposite wall and landed elbow first in her gut, before savaging her with a flurry of kicks, the final blow once more blowing them apart. Regaining her balance, Middle reformed her purple whip and cracked it at the dirty martial artist. When he caught it in one hand she froze from shock, giving him the opening he needed. Twisting in mid-air, Issei used the energy weapon to smash her into a nearby rooftop, overpowering the superhuman musculature of her wings. The whip remained in existence long enough for gravity to help it swing Issei towards the building's side, then run up a vertical surface to join Middle at the top. This new perch was far higher than their starting point, though neither combatant felt like enjoying the view. Using the dazzling speed granted by her leg braces, Middle disappeared and reappeared at Issei's 6, throwing another disc of purple at his back. This time however he was on the ball, spinning and striking in the center. Again Middle hesitated as her weapon shattered, and again Issei reacted. The blonde girl barely jumped over his sliding kick, only to be skewered by a rising uppercut. She recovered faster than Issei expected, lunging into his guard with a series of jabs that the tramp, way too used to being the faster fighter, was unable to avoid. When she finally used a powerful axe kick, Issei took advantage of the short time it took to prepare, bringing his arms up to block. He immediately wished he hadn't. Though her greaves clearly increased her strength and speed, the effect was focused in her legs, causing his arms to creak and the tiles below to rupture. With a single pained grunt, Issei pushed her leg upwards and knocked her off balance. In the same movement he fell backwards, turning the somersault into a rising kick that struck the fallen angel in the chin and launched her into the air. He allowed himself to smirk at her comeuppance as he finished his maneuver, leaping in pursuit. He was too late. Middle had regained her balance and once more unleashed an omnidirectional barrage as he hung helpless in the air. This time Issei grabbed her outstretched fist, flipped himself so he was balanced on her outstretched arm, marveling at the constitution, she must have to let him do such a thing, and jumped, causing her to spin in midair. Again he began to bounce off the walls, this time doing his best impersonation of Middle's blitz attack. Temporarily overwhelmed by the multi-directional blows, she barely managed to block a flying kick with her forearms. As Issei used her guard to push off, she felt confident she could deal with him now she knew where he was. Only to whirl and block a crushing punch from the opposite direction. She barely had time to wonder how he did it before her body responded for her, knocking him away with a lightning-fast kick. Only to once more block an attack from the opposite side, this time a kick. Middle grimaced. If he had somehow gained the ability of three-dimensional movement, this could get very ugly very quickly. She blurred away, aiming for the hit-and-run tactic she had favored throughout the fight. Just as she was about to crash foot first into his back, he disappeared. A moment later she followed his lead just before he took off her head. The high-speed game of cat and mouse occurred, a cloud of movement hovering in mid-air as they attempted to one-up one another. Finally one of them slipped, a devastating axe kick slamming them into a high rooftop. Issei pulled himself from the crater, brushing the rubble from his already filthy clothes. In the end, Middle's greater experience in three-dimensional combat had won out. The goth lowly gently alighted a few yards away, wings retracting behind her. "You can fly?" she wondered curiously. He chuckled, having genuinely enjoyed the exchange. "I distributed my center of gravity as far as I could, then used palm thrusts to propel myself through the air. Not quite flight, but it's the closest I've come so far." He rolled his shoulders, wincing sheepishly. "My arms are going to scream in the morning." They exchanged friendly smiles, the moment of camaraderie brief but meaningful. Then the spurs at Middle's heels screamed angrily, propelling her forward in a flying kick. As if in slow motion, Issei watched her approach. Calmly, he ducked under her attack before striking upward with a single finger, twisting it into a certain spot on her dot. For a moment she seemed to freeze in midair, before screaming and writhing to the ground. When she finally quieted into S, slick with sweat, Issei gave her a critical look. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "Hit and run throughout the whole damn fight, and then you suddenly go for a direct attack. I mean, come on." "I'm sorry," she gasped, even though she wasn't sorry at all. "Issei-sama." Issei blinked in surprise. Getting a girl to call him that after only a single touch was actually a new personal best. "I forgive you," he said finally. "Well," chimed in a new voice. That was impressive. Issei turned mildly to face the newest challenger. "Indeed. She's really very good. And that leg gear. It's called a sacred gear," said Denasiage. Aside from Reiner Sama, all the fallen angels in our church have one. I see. Nodded Issei, carefully moving away from the unconscious middled. This includes you? Well, yes. Admitted the older man. But that doesn't mean I can't appreciate the classics. Like an angel's hereditary ability to manipulate light, for example. A spear of blue light manifested in his hands, giving off a low hum. And then, of course, there's traditional magic. An Issei threw the spear, and in the same moment a set of fleshy vine-like appendages burst from the ground to wrap around Issei's ankles. Displaying incredible leg strength, Issei hopped in place, forcefully dragging the vines out of the ground. In the same moment that the light spear severed his bonds, Issei landed on the flying weapon, using it as a foothold before lunging at the other man. Having arrogantly believed the simple plot would work, the foolish man was too surprised to react when Issei uppercutted him out of the block. But a bounce and a crunch, an Issei landed on another high-altitude rooftop. Issei had moved to a similar spot just across the street, both of them far away from where Middle lay passed out. Just out of curiosity, said Issei blandly. This sacred whatever, what kind do you have? Though furious at his recent humiliation, Issei's lips curled in a savage grin. The kind that can give you back what has been lost. Something moved beneath the skin of his face. His right cheek began to bulge with distended veins, his right eye sinking into his head. An eye pierced by an angel's spear. The entire right side of his head had hardened into a blackened carapace. His hair had been replaced by spidery claw-like appendages, some the length of hand, others dangling to the ground. The way they prodded at the air gave Issei the uncomfortable feeling they were actually some form of sensory organ. The right eye was now bulbous and yellow, the pupil a narrow slit. An arm severed by a devil's sword. His left sleeve burst open, the arm beneath now predictably made of the same material as his face. It was huge and distended, the fingers identical in length and seemingly vestigial. Yet more of the claw things decorated his shoulder and forearm. All returned, with power tenfold. Okay. Said Issei finally. I admitted. That's really intimidating. Quick, Issei. Shouted Judas, startling Issei after his long absence. Say something hilarious, like. I'll do whatever you say. Repeated Issei, his voice completely deadpan. Just please don't tentacle rape me. But the snarled Issei raised his intact arm, an orb of black energy with a white core focusing in his hand. Issei hurled himself to the side as it erupted in a blast of dark lightning, his nostrils assailed by the smell of ozone. In a blur of movement he was behind the fallen angel, left leg swinging around in a devastating kick. With speed that didn't suit his ungainly form, Issei spun and blocked the attack with his deformed arm, one of a series of yellow cysts running up his arm exploding with dark energy and pushing the hobo back. This is incredible. Laughed Issei, who was obviously feeling a lot more confident. Issei had landed at a skid on a different roof. You're just a human, yet your speed and reflexes are astounding. Twice you have avoided my attacks. He lifted his mutated arm and pointed it at the martial artist. His whole forearm began to split like a three-petaled flower, revealing a short tube whose insides glowed with black light. Issei was genre savvy enough to recognize that it was a form of cannon. Let's see you dodge this. The following blast was like nothing Issei had ever faced. It was pure instinct that let him dig his foot into the ground and flip it up to act as a shield. Rather than simply hiding behind it, which would have gotten him annihilated, Issei used a hunk of concrete to hit the blast in its underside, forcefully redirecting it upwards to explode with incredible volume against the skyline. What Issei didn't know was that the method used by the fallen angels to steal sacred gears from humans generally left them with incredibly poor compatibility. This meant that the blast he had just weathered was highly unstable, which was the whole reason he had managed to redirect it. If it had been stable, it would burn through his makeshift barrier easily. Issei was already on the attack, as Issei was helplessly watching his arm reform in what the hobo theorized was a form of cooldown time. Numerous light spears fired out of the air, but the tramp either dodged them or used them as stepping stones in his rush. With an angry roar, the mutated fallen angel shot another of the smaller blasts from his intact arm, but Issei simply rolled under it. Taking advantage of the movement, he attempted to move around Issei's right, but the claws attached to his face swung down in an attempt to skewer him. Issei grabbed the two closest and deliberately impaled them in the ground to either side of his body, their awkward proportions preventing any others from trying the same. Keeping his hands where they were, Issei lifted his entire body off the ground and swung himself around his enemy's back, striking out with a kick at the unprotected side of Issei's face. His ankle almost snapped when his foot hit a misty black barrier, which was solid enough for him to use it as a springboard before the mandibles emerging from Issei's left shoulder tried to rip his leg off. He was too surprised by the block, however, so instead of leaping to a different rooftop as he had been making sure to do throughout the fight, he ended up only a few feet away from his enemy. When Issei turned around, his large form seemed to fill the high space. At this range there was almost no room for Issei to dodge his attacks, and they both knew it. Not bad. Smirked Issei, having decided it was safe to gloat now that he had the advantage. Few people get close enough to make me activate my barrier. I'll bet. Growled Issei, and meant it. It doesn't look like regular punches are going to do me any good. Is that your way of giving up? No. Issei paused in confusion. It means that I'm not going to use regular punches anymore. The fallen angel's remaining lidded eye widened as something between mist and light manifested around Issei's shoulders. The haze of blue began to writhe and solidify until finally taking the form of an Asian dragon. As the construct of Kai began to wrap itself about his body, the head resting at his left wrist, Issei watched the other man raise his mutated arm, which bloomed once more into its canon form. Behind him his dark Kai burned into the sky. It was more of a face than a head, a nightmarish silhouette that was somewhere between an ogre and a spider. As the barrel of Issei's cannon began to glow with satanic energies, Issei's dragon began to coil and whirl about him until it had devolved into a whirlwind of focused Kai around his forearm. The tension mounted as each of them tried to prepare their attack before the other. When the cannon finished charging first, it let out an ungodly scream, releasing forth a blaze far greater than the last. That disappeared through the cloud line when it missed. Issei stared blankly after it, then down at the fist embedded in his gut, then finally at the burning blue eyes of the man that had stepped inside his guard so much quicker than he could react. Little shards of what appeared to be black glass, all that remained of his barrier, floated slowly through the air. As time began to flow normally again, the last thing Issei heard was the word. Thodome. With what might have been a sonic boom, he was blown backwards into the adjacent building. Paced so closely to one another they may as well have been simultaneous, he felt himself crash through several walls and finally emerge out the other side, only to fly into the next building. Having broken some of his momentum, he began to bounce and flip as the walls continued to fold like cardboard, the pain briefly ceasing only for him to relive the experience a third time. When he finally tumbled out the other end, he fell a short drop, skidded painfully onto a slightly shorter roof, and met blissful oblivion face down on the floor. After walking through the 3 gaping holes left in his victim's wake and waving cheerfully to the shocked residents, Issei hopped down to the comatose Issei and nudged him with one foot. Did I win? Having thoroughly jinxed himself, it should have come as no surprise when he was almost blown to the streets below by sudden gale force winds. The enormous death machine that came flying in out of nowhere resembled a plane in general shape, with stout wings and a heavily armored body. It was held aloft by an enormous set of helicopter blades, and beneath the nose hung an impressive chain gun. A double-barreled turret sat atop the tip of each wing, while 3 heavy-duty missile launchers hung below. Get down on the ground and put your hands on your head. The pilot roared, the loudspeakers doubtlessly waking up everyone in the neighborhood that hadn't already been roused by Issei's stupid arm cannon. No. Said Issei flatly. He glanced at the fallen angel, only to see Reiner crouched over him. Middle was also there, as Reiner had apparently grabbed her on the way over. The scantily clad girl froze as she felt his eyes on her. Is that one of yours? Why yes. Stammered Reiner, wondering how she was supposed to rescue her unconscious teammates now that he had spotted her. Then you were going to use it to distract me while you escaped with your friends. The helicopter was just hovering there, most likely scared shitless after witnessing his dismantling of Issei. Okay, you can go. The look of sheer WTF on her face was priceless. Seriously? Sure. He nodded generously. It's not like I don't know where you live. Though this sent tingles down her spine, whether from fear or arousal she couldn't tell, she touched her companions and prepared to warp. Wait. One last thing. She paused nervously. I don't like girls who show too much skin. Wear something else next time. Her face nearly ablaze from mortification, Ama no Yuma vanished. Almost immediately afterwards, the aircraft fired every missile it had. Using the same movement technique he had been using to land on punches, kicks and light spears, Issei began to jump with such grace he seemed to be floating from one missile to another. Unfortunately, the rockets were moving even faster than he was, and though the explosion as they hit the roof blew him into the sky, he was still nowhere near close enough to attack his aggressor. As the turrets and chain gun began to fire, Issei used his pseudo-flight technique, each palm thrust causing a gust of wind that sent him spiraling away from the line of fire like a leaf on the breeze. With a final push he crashed into the nose, grabbing huge fistfuls of the metal with his unreal grip strength. With a yank he threw himself upwards, withdrawing his fingers from the contorted alloy to smash one fist into the cockpit window. Unfortunately, it wasn't made out of glass, it was instead formed from the same substance as that odd shield used by Issei. Having lost all purchase, Issei tumbled through the air, only to pierce the surface of the right wing with his toes, still having holes in his shoes from the last time he had taken down a helicopter, and hold himself upright through sheer ab strength. Inside the cockpit, the pilot took manual control of the right turret and began to fire at the persistent hobo. With movements that wouldn't have been out of place in a Matrix film, Issei began to dodge, bending at the waist while slowly making his way towards the powerful gun. After images were left by his unnatural contortions, and fresh holes were pushed into the wing with each step. As he finally reached the turret, Issei dug his foot into its base, tearing it straight off the wing to explode on the ground below. The chopper tilted wildly with the sudden weight difference, but Issei remained upright as he returned the way he came. Stopping just short of the cockpit, he stomped first one foot then the other, embedding himself up to the ankles in the tough alloy. He paused to gather his nerve. With a roar, he threw up his arms and grabbed one of the rudder blades, stopping it dead. As the aircraft dropped out of the sky, Issei gave an agonized scream, ripping the blade clear and stabbing it into the wing. With one last grunt of pain from his abused body, Issei used his new lever to pull himself free, throwing himself clear of the doomed chopper. Knowing his end was nigh, the pilot locked onto the hobo as he rolled onto the pavement and fired every missile he had. The last thing he saw before he exploded against the earth was the network of fiery trails they left across the sky. Issei didn't even turn around after hearing the rockets fire. He simply grabbed a lump of tarmac, crushed it into chunks with his unreal grip, and tossed it at the pursuing warheads. He averted his eyes as they exploded, the hot winds whipping his clothes about and the flames causing an oddly pleasant sensation of warmth. When the worst of the blast was over, he finally allowed himself to relax, slumping to the ground with a groan. "You know," said Judas, scaring the life out of him. "I think that little blonde girl let you win." "Not now, Judas. I mean, even if you were more skilled, she was faster, stronger and had the mobility advantage. She was obviously interested in your molester powers, and you explained to everyone there where the pressure points were. It was definitely deliberate how she left herself open with that attack at the end." "Seriously, shut up," groaned Issei. "I stopped a helicopter blade, I used soaring Buddha palm, and that stupid punch." He fell flat on his back, eyes scrunched closed. "Everything hurts. Would it make you feel any better if I told you you have 3 willing slaves waiting for you in that church?" There was a long pause. "The little. At Ku Academy." A 2-dimensional image was sprawled across the wall, courtesy of Ria's bat familiar. It showed Issei, where he lay near the smoking remains of a high-grade attack chopper. All 4 devils sat and stared, with varying levels of shock. What Kiba had to stop and gulp for how hoarse his voice was. "What is he? At the church?" Issei saw him, feeling more refreshed than she had in months. Kalawana slowly stirred awake. "Huh? Where?" Reiner looked down at her with something resembling comradely sympathy. They were in their hideout's medical wing, and Middleton Denasiage lay prone on nearby beds. "Finally, you're up. How did it go?" "He decimated us." When the older girl glanced at the sleeping blonde, Reiner elaborated. "Middle suffered the same fate we did. Must be why she's smiling." Indeed, the shortest of the fallen angels had a huge grin on her face, though whether it was from a good dream or just stuck there she couldn't say. "We have a problem," said Reiner finally. When Kalawana shot her an inquisitive look, she continued. "He's friends with Asia. He won't be pleased when he finds out what we have planned." Kalawana pondered the thought. "What do we do?" she asked finally. "We're going to have to move up preparations for the ceremony. All 4 of us will need to work together if we want to be done by tomorrow night. When Asia is done healing Lachlan, we'll have him lead everyone we have left in cleaning house. We'll need to skip town as quickly as possible once we're finished." "Are you sure?" said Kalawana uncertainly. "Isn't it a little drastic?" "We've done this before," said Reiner seriously. "Having your sacred gear removed means the most painful kind of death. If he hears what we've done to Asia, he will kill us. Trust me." At the door, Asia stood just out of sight. Her back was to the wall, her hand over her mouth. She had had such hopes of this place. She had wanted to be accepted, to find friends, to serve God in ways the church wouldn't let her. But these people, they were monsters. She had to escape. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Vergil Creiger for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.